My name is Evan Wilson. This happened in October 2024. I was 34 years old when I decided to take that solo camping trip into Nebraska's Pine Ridge, specifically the remote trails around Soldier Creek Wilderness. Looking back, I can't help but laugh bitterly at my reasoning. I thought the isolation would help clear my head after my divorce from Rachel. 6 months of legal battles, dividing assets, and watching 8 years of marriage crumble into nothing but bitterness and paperwork. You need to disconnect, my therapist had told me during our last session. Find somewhere quiet, somewhere without the constant notifications and reminders of your urban life. So there I was, driving my Honda CR-V along Highway 20, watching as the landscape gradually transformed from the flat farmlands into the surprisingly dramatic ridges and canyons of Nebraska's northwestern corner. Most people don't realize Nebraska has such diverse terrain. I certainly hadn't before researching this trip. The Pine Ridge area rises about 1,000 feet above the surrounding plains, creating a rugged topography of pine-covered ridges and deep, secluded valleys. I reached the small town of Crawford by mid-afternoon, stopping at the last proper grocery store I'd see for days to stock up on additional supplies. The elderly cashier raised an eyebrow when I mentioned I was headed solo to the Soldier Creek area. "Bit late in the season for camping up there," she remarked, bagging my items. "Gets cold at night. Real cold." "I've got good gear," I assured her, though in truth I was hardly an experienced outdoorsman. My camping experience consisted mostly of organized campgrounds with nearby facilities. "Just stick to the marked trails," she added, handing me my change. "People wander off course up there sometimes. Not all of them find their way back." I nodded politely, dismissing her warning as small-town superstition. I had my phone, a portable GPS, maps, and enough supplies to last 5 days, though I only planned to stay for 3. What could possibly go wrong? The road to the trailhead grew increasingly narrow and rough as I left Crawford behind. The evening sun cast long shadows through the ponderosa pines, creating alternating patterns of golden light and deep darkness across the path. By the time I reached the small gravel parking area at Soldier Creek Trailhead, the sun was already dipping below the ridge line. I debated whether to set up camp near the trailhead for the night or push on to my intended first campsite about 2 miles in. Pride won out. I didn't drive all this way to camp within sight of my car. Besides, 2 miles would be nothing, even with my full pack. The trail started easily enough, well marked with blue blazes painted on trees and posts. The late afternoon was quiet except for the occasional rustle of wind through the pines and the satisfying crunch of fallen needles beneath my boots. The path followed Soldier Creek itself, a narrow stream that carved its way through the ridge. Though the water level was low this late in the season, I could hear its gentle gurgling as I hiked alongside it. As I walked deeper into the wilderness, I felt the weight of the past 6 months gradually lifting from my shoulders. No emails, no lawyers, no well-meaning friends asking how I was holding up. Just silence and solitude. Every step took me further from civilization and closer to the kind of peace I'd been searching for. That feeling lasted precisely 97 minutes. The trail began to ascend more steeply, winding up the ridge through increasingly dense forest. With the sun now below the horizon, the temperature dropped rapidly. I switched on my headlamp and checked my GPS to confirm I was still on course. According to the device, I was less than half a mile from the small clearing where I planned to make camp. That's when I heard it. A sound that didn't belong in these woods. A sound that made me freeze mid-step. It was singing. A woman's voice, distant but clear, singing a melody I didn't recognize. The notes drifted through the trees, somehow both beautiful and unsettling. I stood motionless, straining to hear better, trying to determine the direction it was coming from. The singing stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so complete it felt oppressive. I remained still for several more moments before shaking off the unease. Probably another camper, I reasoned, though I hadn't seen any other vehicles at the trailhead. I continued hiking, moving faster now. The darkness between the trees seemed to deepen, swallowing the beam of my headlamp more quickly than it should have. When I finally reached the clearing, I hurriedly set up my tent, my earlier tranquility replaced by an inexplicable urgency. As I finished securing the rainfly, I noticed 2 headlamps bobbing through the trees from the direction I had come. Relief washed over me. Other hikers, perfectly normal. The mysterious singing forgotten, I waved my own light in greeting. "Hello there," called a friendly female voice. "Mind if we join you? This clearing looks perfect for camping." 2 figures emerged from the tree line. A woman with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and a tall, broad-shouldered man carrying what looked like professional-grade equipment. "I'm Michelle," said the woman, extending her hand. She appeared to be in her late 20s, with an open, friendly face. "And this is Tyler." Tyler nodded in greeting, already shrugging off his heavy pack. "Hope we're not intruding. Trail markers got a bit confusing back there as it got dark." "I'm Evan," I replied, shaking both their hands. "And not at all. Plenty of room here." They set up their tent with practiced efficiency, and soon we were all sitting around a small campfire that Tyler had skillfully built. The night had grown even colder, and I was secretly grateful for their company and the extra warmth of a proper fire. Over packets of dehydrated camping meals, I learned that Michelle was a trauma nurse from Omaha and Tyler worked in tech. They were friends who made a point of doing one challenging outdoor trip together each year. This time, they were planning a 4-day trek through the Pine Ridge area. "What brings you out here alone?" Michelle asked, stirring her rehydrated pasta meal. I hesitated, then decided there was no harm in telling the truth. Going through a divorce. Needed to clear my head. Tyler nodded sympathetically. Nature has a way of putting things in perspective. "That's the hope," I agreed. The conversation flowed easily after that. They were experienced hikers with entertaining stories from previous adventures. By the time we decided to turn in, I felt more relaxed than I had in months. "We're heading deeper into the wilderness tomorrow," Michelle mentioned as we doused the fire. "You're welcome to join us if you want company. We're taking the northern trail up toward Pants Butte." I hadn't planned on company, but something about the idea appealed to me. Perhaps complete solitude wasn't what I needed after all. "I might take you up on that," I replied. Sleep came easily that night, though my dreams were restless, fragments of Rachel's face morphing into unfamiliar landscapes, and that distant singing voice calling me by name. I woke to the smell of coffee brewing. Tyler was already up, tending a small morning fire, his breath visible in the cold dawn air. "Sleep well?" he asked, pouring me a steaming cup from his camping percolator. "Well enough," I said, gratefully accepting the coffee. "Where's Michelle?" "Went to filter some water from the creek," he replied. "Should be back soon." As I sipped the coffee, I noticed Tyler watching me with unusual intensity. When our eyes met, he quickly looked away, busying himself with packing equipment. Michelle returned with filled water bottles, and after a quick breakfast of energy bars and more coffee, we broke camp. I decided to accompany them on their planned route. The solitude I'd sought now seemed less appealing than the comfort of human connection. The morning hike was invigorating. The trail climbed steadily, offering occasional breathtaking views across the ridges. Pine forests gave way to open meadows dotted with wildflowers that had somehow survived into late autumn. We stopped for lunch on an exposed rock outcropping, where Tyler produced a small pair of binoculars and pointed out a golden eagle soaring on thermals in the distance. "This is perfect," Michelle sighed contentedly, leaning back on her elbows to soak in the sunshine. Exactly what I needed to recharge before going back to the hospital chaos. I had to agree. The combination of physical exertion, fresh mountain air, and pleasant company had worked wonders for my mental state. For hours at a time, I forgot about the divorce, the empty apartment waiting for me back in Lincoln, the fractured pieces of my former life. It was mid-afternoon when the first strange thing happened. We were consulting our maps and GPS devices to confirm our route to the next campsite near Pants Butte when Tyler frowned at his compass. "That's weird," he muttered, tapping the device. "What's wrong?" Michelle asked, peering over his shoulder. "Compass isn't working right. North keeps shifting." I checked my own compass and saw what he meant. The needle swung erratically, never settling on a consistent reading. "Probably mineral deposits in these rock formations," Tyler suggested after a moment. "Let's rely on the GPS." But when we checked our GPS devices, another problem emerged. Both Tyler's handheld unit and my phone app showed our location as being nearly 2 miles west of where we knew we were based on trail markers and landmarks. "Technology," Michelle laughed, though her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "This is why we always bring paper maps, too." We continued hiking, now more carefully watching the trail blazes painted on trees. The day had grown unseasonably warm for October in Nebraska, and I found myself sweating despite the occasional cool breeze. The forest around us seemed to change subtly as we progressed, the trees growing denser, closer together, their branches reaching out like grasping fingers above the trail. By late afternoon, we reached a small plateau where we decided to make camp for the night. The site featured a natural clearing with a stunning view eastward across the rugged landscape. As we set up our tents, I noticed Tyler repeatedly checking his watch with a puzzled expression. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, just..." He hesitated. "Does it feel like the sun is setting too quickly to you?" I looked at the horizon where the sun was indeed sinking with visible speed, the golden light rapidly shifting to deep orange and then crimson. "Might be because of the ridgeline," I suggested, though I wasn't convinced by my own explanation. Something about the accelerated dusk felt fundamentally wrong, as if time itself had become inconsistent. We finished setting up camp and gathered firewood before darkness fell completely. As Tyler arranged kindling for the fire, Michelle approached me with her water filter. "Want to help me get water for tonight and tomorrow? There's supposed to be a spring just down that slope," she said, pointing to a faint path leading away from our campsite. I agreed, and we descended about 100 yards to find a small spring bubbling from between moss-covered rocks. As Michelle worked her filter pump, she spoke without looking up. "Does Tyler seem different to you today?" she asked quietly. The question startled me. "Different how? I barely know him." "I've known him for 5 years. He's usually much more talkative, always planning, always the first to point out wildlife or interesting plants." She paused her pumping. "Today, he's been quiet, almost withdrawn, and he keeps staring at us when he thinks we're not looking." I hadn't noticed anything particularly strange about Tyler's behavior, but then again, I had no baseline for comparison. "Maybe he's just tired?" Michelle nodded, though she didn't appear convinced. "Maybe. And maybe I'm just being paranoid. Let's head back up." When we returned to the campsite, Tyler had the fire going, a robust blaze that cast dancing shadows across the clearing. Night had fallen completely now, the darkness between the trees absolute, as if the forest beyond our little circle of firelight had been swallowed by void. "I was about to come looking for you," Tyler said. "You were gone longer than expected." "The spring was a bit further than I thought," Michelle replied, her tone carefully neutral. We prepared our dinner around the fire, the mood noticeably more subdued than the previous evening. Tyler was indeed quieter, responding to questions with short answers rather than the animated stories he'd shared the night before. Once, when I looked up unexpectedly, I caught him staring at me with an expression I couldn't interpret, something between curiosity and hunger. After we finished eating, Tyler stood abruptly. "We need more firewood to last the night. I'll go gather some." "I'll come help," Michelle offered quickly. "No need," Tyler replied, already moving toward the darkness beyond our camp. "I won't go far." We watched him disappear into the trees, the beam of his headlamp visible for several seconds before being swallowed by the forest. As soon as he was gone, Michelle turned to me, her voice urgent but hushed. "Something's wrong with him, Evan. I've never seen him like this." "People can act differently in different circumstances," I suggested, trying to sound reasonable. "And you said yourself your hospital work has been stressful." Maybe you're projecting some of that anxiety." She shook her head firmly. "No. I know Tyler. The way he moves is different today. The way he speaks, even small mannerisms. It's like he's playing a role, but getting small details wrong." I was about to respond when a branch snapped loudly in the darkness behind us. We both jumped, turning to see Tyler emerging from the trees with an armload of firewood. "Found plenty just beyond those pines," he said, dropping the wood near the fire. His voice sounded normal enough to me, though I noticed he didn't blink as he looked at us. The rest of the evening passed in uncomfortable silence. Michelle made a show of being tired and retreated to her tent early. Tyler and I sat by the fire a while longer, but conversation was sparse and strained. When I finally decided to turn in, Tyler remained by the fire, staring into the flames with unnerving intensity. "Aren't you going to sleep?" I asked. "Soon," he replied without looking up. "I like watching the fire." Inside my tent, I struggled to fall asleep. Michelle's concerns had planted a seed of doubt that was now growing rapidly. I found myself straining to hear any sounds from outside. Tyler moving around the camp, perhaps approaching our tents. Eventually, exhaustion overcame anxiety, and I drifted into uneasy sleep. I dreamed of being watched through the fabric of my tent, of shadowy figures circling like predators sizing up prey. And through it all, that same distant singing, calling my name in a voice that was somehow both enticing and terrible. A scream tore me from sleep, a man's scream, raw with terror, abruptly cut short. I bolted upright, heart pounding. Outside my tent, I could hear Michelle moving around urgently. "Tyler," she called. "Tyler, where are you?" I scrambled out of my sleeping bag and unzipped my tent. The clearing was bathed in pale pre-dawn light. Michelle stood near the dead fire pit, still in her sleeping clothes, turning in circles with a frantic expression. "Did you hear that?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "It was Tyler," she said, her face pale. "Something's happened to him." We checked his tent first. It was empty, his sleeping bag neatly arranged as if it hadn't been used at all. His pack was there, but his boots and jacket were gone. He must have gone out during the night, I reasoned. Maybe an animal caught him by surprise. Michelle was already pulling on her hiking boots. "We need to find him, now." We grabbed flashlights even though the dawn provided enough light to see, and began searching the perimeter of our campsite. We found Tyler's tracks leading toward the same area where he had gathered firewood the previous evening. Following them was easy at first, clear boot prints in the soft forest soil, but about 50 yards in, something strange happened. The tracks suddenly diversified, as if multiple people wearing identical boots had walked in different directions. "This doesn't make sense," I muttered, staring at the confusing pattern. "It's like he started walking in circles, or something is trying to confuse us," Michelle finished, her voice tight with fear. We split up slightly, still within sight of each other, each following a different set of tracks. The forest felt oppressively still around us, no bird songs or insect sounds breaking the silence of dawn. The trees seemed to press closer together here, their branches intertwining overhead to block much of the growing daylight. "Evan!" Michelle's horrified cry came from about 30 feet to my right. "Oh, God! Evan!" I rushed toward her voice, pushing through dense underbrush. When I reached her, she was standing motionless, staring at something on the ground behind a fallen log. As I moved closer, the smell hit me first. Copper and rot, and something else, something chemical. Tyler's body lay contorted in a small depression behind the log, partially covered with pine needles and leaves. But body isn't the right word for what we found. His torso had been split open from sternum to pelvis, the cavity hollowed out like an empty husk. His face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror, eyes wide and mouth stretched in a silent scream. Most disturbing of all, his skin bore no signs of blood. The massive wound was dry, the edges strangely puckered as if desiccated. Michelle turned away and vomited. I stood paralyzed, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This kind of damage couldn't be caused by any animal I knew of. And if this was Tyler... "Michelle," I whispered, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "If this is Tyler, then who came back to camp with the firewood last night?" Her head snapped up, eyes widening with the same terrible understanding. "We need to get out of here," she said, already backing away from the body. "Now. We need to go back to the campsite, grab essential supplies, and get the hell out." We moved quickly through the forest, no longer caring about tracking or stealth. When we reached the clearing, everything appeared exactly as we had left it. Tents still standing, packs where we'd left them, the fire pit cold and dead. "Let's be quick," Michelle said, her nurse's training apparently kicking in as she took charge of the situation. "Just grab water, food, navigation equipment, and emergency supplies. Leave everything else." I nodded, diving into my tent to grab my small day pack. As I stuffed it with essentials, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work the zippers, a new sound froze me in place. Footsteps approaching the clearing. Heavy footsteps, unconcerned with stealth. "Michelle," I hissed. "Someone's coming." She emerged from her tent, her face set with determination despite the fear in her eyes. She held Tyler's hunting knife, which she must have retrieved from his pack. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the clearing. We both turned toward the sound. Tyler stepped out from between the trees. But it wasn't Tyler, not really. The thing that wore Tyler's form moved with a fluid grace that was both beautiful and profoundly wrong. Like a skilled puppeteer animating a human-sized marionette. It wore Tyler's clothing, had Tyler's face, but the eyes. The eyes were ancient and hungry and utterly inhuman. "Why did you go looking?" it asked in Tyler's voice, though the intonation was slightly off, as if it was learning human speech by imitation. "You should have stayed here. It would have been easier." Michelle raised the knife. "What are you?" The thing wearing Tyler's skin tilted its head at an angle no human neck should allow. "The Lakota have many names for my kind. The ones who settled these lands later called me the Whisperer." Its mouth stretched into a grotesque approximation of a smile. "I've lived in these ridges since before your kind learned to make fire." "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely audible even to myself. The creature took a step forward and we both instinctively backed away. "What all things want," it replied simply, "to continue existing." Another step forward. "Your friend resisted, made too much noise, but I've learned from that mistake." In a movement almost too fast to follow, it lunged toward Michelle. She slashed wildly with the knife, catching it across what should have been Tyler's chest. The wound gaped open, but instead of blood, a thick black substance like tar oozed slowly from the cut. The creature looked down at the wound with mild curiosity, then back at Michelle. That was unwise. What happened next occurred so quickly I can only recall it in disjointed fragments. The thing that wasn't Tyler seemed to ripple, its form momentarily losing cohesion before resolving into something larger, its limbs elongating, fingers extending into curved talons. Michelle screamed and tried to run, but it caught her with impossible speed, enveloping her in a grotesque embrace. I heard a wet, tearing sound and saw Michelle's body go limp. Self-preservation finally overcame my paralysis. I turned and ran blindly into the forest, away from the clearing, away from the creature, away from the terrible wet sounds of Michelle's body being processed. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to collapse beneath me. Then I kept running, crashing through underbrush, tumbling down slopes, climbing desperately up the other side. I don't know how long I fled. The forest seemed to change around me, paths appearing and disappearing, landmarks repeating impossibly. The sun jumped positions in the sky as if time itself had become unstable. At one point, I found myself back at the spring where Michelle and I had collected water, though I was certain I'd been running in the opposite direction. Finally, I collapsed against the trunk of a massive ponderosa pine, my breath coming in ragged gasps. As my pounding heart gradually slowed, I became aware that I was not alone. Soft singing drifted through the trees. That same haunting melody I'd heard my first night in the wilderness. It was closer now, just beyond the next ridge. Against all reason and survival instinct, I found myself drawn toward it. I crested the ridge and found myself looking down into a small, secluded valley I didn't recognize from any of the maps. At its center stood a crude structure that resembled a lodge built from bent saplings and hides. Seated outside this structure was Michelle. She looked up as I approached, her face breaking into a relieved smile. "Evan, thank God you're alive. I've been hiding here since I got away." Every instinct screamed that this was wrong, impossible. I had seen her caught by the creature. Yet here she was, apparently unharmed, beckoning me closer. "Stay back," I croaked, my throat raw from exertion and fear. "It's me, Evan," she said, rising to her feet. "I got away when it attacked. I've been trying to find my way back to the trail." She took a step toward me. "I'm so glad I found you. We can get out of here together." She sounded like Michelle, looked like Michelle. But something subtle was off. The same wrongness I'd sensed in the thing wearing Tyler's form. "If you're Michelle," I said, backing away slowly, "tell me what you do for a living." A flicker of confusion crossed her face, quickly replaced by that same reassuring smile. "I'm a doctor, of course. Emergency medicine." A nurse, not a doctor. The mistake confirmed my suspicions. This thing, this whisperer, wasn't perfect in its mimicry. It made small errors, missed details. The realization gave me a fragile hope of survival. The thing wearing Michelle's form must have sensed my awareness. Its expression changed, the friendly smile morphing into something predatory. "Almost," it said, still using Michelle's voice but no longer attempting to maintain the illusion of humanity. "You humans are more perceptive than most prey. It makes the hunt interesting." It began to change, Michelle's form rippling like heat waves above hot asphalt. I turned to run again but found my path blocked by another figure emerging from the trees. Tyler, or rather another manifestation of the same entity. "Did you think I couldn't divide my attention?" the Tyler form asked, its voice overlapping eerily with Michelle's voice behind me. "That I couldn't wear multiple skins at once?" I was trapped between them now, the two forms of the whisperer closing in from opposite directions. In desperation, I reached for anything that might serve as a weapon. My hand closed around a fallen branch. Not much, but better than nothing. As the Michelle form lunged toward me, I swung the branch with all my strength, connecting solidly with what should have been her head. There was a sound, like breaking pottery, and the form staggered backward. Black ichor sprayed from a crack that had appeared in its face, the human visage momentarily slipping to reveal something ancient and insectile beneath. The Tyler form hissed in pain. Apparently damage to one manifestation affected them all. Taking advantage of the creature's momentary distraction, I bolted past the injured Michelle form, running toward the crude lodge structure. Inside, I hoped to find something more substantial to defend myself with. The interior of the lodge was dimly lit by a small fire pit in the center. The walls were adorned with what I first took to be decorative elements, intricate patterns of woven material. As my eyes adjusted to the gloom, horror washed over me anew. The walls were lined with human remains, bones, dried tissue, fragments of clothing and equipment dating from different eras. Some looked decades old, others disturbingly fresh. Among the grisly trophies, something caught my eye. A metal canister that stood out among the organic remains. I lunged for it, recognizing it as a canister of bear spray, likely taken from a previous victim. When I grabbed it, I noticed it was still nearly full. Outside, I could hear the creature approaching, its movements no longer mimicking human patterns but flowing with that same uncanny, fluid grace. I positioned myself near the entrance, canister ready. The Michelle form appeared in the doorway, its face still bearing the crack from my strike, black fluid leaking steadily from the wound. "You can't leave this valley," it said matter-of-factly. None who see my true nature ever leave. There's always a first time, I replied and emptied the bear spray directly into its face. The effect was instantaneous and terrible. The creature emitted a shriek that no human throat could produce, a multi-toned wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The Michelle form clawed at its face as the caustic spray ate into whatever substance composed its counterfeit flesh. The human disguise began to slough away in chunks, revealing glimpses of the entity beneath, something chitinous and segmented with too many joints and impossible angles. I didn't wait to see more. I pushed past the thrashing form and ran from the lodge, heading uphill toward the ridge line. Behind me, both manifestations of the Whisperer writhed in shared agony, their forms becoming increasingly unstable as they lost control of their human disguises. I ran without direction, without plan, driven solely by the need to put distance between myself and the creature. The forest blurred around me. Time seemed to stutter and jump, and the landscape shifted in ways that defied rational explanation. At one point, I found myself running through the same clearing 3 times in succession, though I'd maintained a straight line of travel. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, the sun was setting, though I couldn't be certain how much time had actually passed. I found myself on an exposed ridge overlooking a vast expanse of the Pine Ridge landscape. In the distance, miles away but clearly visible, I could see the lights of what must be Crawford. Civilization, safety, or at least the illusion of it. I began working my way down the ridge, using the distant lights as my guide. Night fell completely, but I didn't dare stop moving. Every shadow held the potential of the Whisperer, every rustle in the darkness a possible manifestation of the entity hunting me. Hours passed in a nightmarish journey through the dark forest. Multiple times I heard that haunting singing in the distance, always from a different direction than the town lights. The Whisperer was trying to lure me back into its domain, but knowing its nature gave me a slim advantage. I could resist the pull of its mimicry. Dawn was breaking when I finally stumbled onto a marked trail that led to a small parking area. Not the one where I'd left my car, but one that connected to a rural road. Half delirious with exhaustion and fear, I followed the road until I encountered an early morning fisherman driving to Soldier Creek. He took one look at my condition and drove me directly to the small hospital in Crawford. The official report says I was the victim of exposure and dehydration, which explained my hallucinations about skinwalkers and doppelgangers. The search parties found no sign of Michelle or Tyler, nor any evidence of our campsite. My car was eventually located at the original trailhead, but none of my camping equipment was ever recovered. I sometimes wonder if the thing in the Pine Ridge is still wearing Tyler's face, or Michelle's, or if it has added my appearance to its repertoire of lures. I wonder how many unsuspecting hikers it has called to with that beautiful, terrible singing in the years since my escape. I tell this story now as a warning. If you find yourself in the remote wilderness of Nebraska's Pine Ridge, specifically near Soldier Creek and Pants Butte, and you hear singing where no human should be, run. Run without looking back. And if you meet fellow hikers who seem just slightly off, who blink too little, who forget small details about themselves, who stare too long with ancient hunger in their eyes, remember the Whisperer, because it remembers you. It knows your name, and in the deep woods where time itself becomes unreliable, it will call to you with the voices of those you thought you could trust. My name is Thomas Callahan, 34. This happened in October 2024. I still have nightmares about it. Growing up in Omaha, I'd always heard the legends about Pine Ridge in the northwestern corner of Nebraska. The locals called the area the Devil's Playground, claiming that strange things happened to hikers who ventured too far into those remote woods. I'd laughed off these stories as rural superstition, the kind of tales you tell around a campfire to scare tourists. I never believed them until I experienced it myself, along with my girlfriend Eliza and our friends from work. It was supposed to be a team-building weekend. a way to escape the fluorescent lights and constant ping of emails that defined our existence at Meridian Financial. There were 5 of us. Me, my girlfriend Eliza Parker, 31, a risk analyst with a practical mind and surprising physical strength. Marcus Whitman, 36, our department head, a fitness enthusiast who organized the trip. Diana Reed, 29, a quiet data scientist who'd reluctantly agreed to come, and Stefan Novak, 33, our newest team member, who had an irritating habit of one-upping everyone's stories. We chose the Pine Ridge National Forest, nestled in the shadows of Nebraska's highest elevations near the Oglala National Grassland. The area wasn't as famous as the Rockies or Appalachian Wilderness, but it had its own wild beauty. Rugged buttes, ponderosa pines that reached toward the sky, and hidden springs that fed into Snake River. More importantly, it was remote enough to feel like a real escape from civilization. The disconnection will be good for all of us, Marcus had insisted during planning. No emails, no calls, just nature and team bonding. Easy for him to say. Outdoor adventures were his thing. The rest of us were city people who considered roughing it to be a hotel without room service. We arrived at the Fort Robinson State Park Visitor Center on Friday afternoon. The ranger who processed our backcountry permits, a weathered man in his 60s named Carl, looked at us with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You folks planning to hike up toward Crow Butte?" he asked, studying our marked trail map. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "We're doing the full loop. 3 days, 2 nights. Is there something we should know?" Carl hesitated, running a hand through his thinning gray hair. "Most folks don't go that far in. Cell reception's non-existent past the first ridge, and there's been some strange reports lately." Diana immediately tensed beside me. "What kind of reports?" "Oh, probably nothing," Carl said, though his expression suggested otherwise. "Just some hikers getting turned around, thinking they saw things that weren't there. The mind plays tricks when you're alone in the woods." He stamped our permits. "Just stay on the marked trails and you'll be fine. And if you happen to run across anyone else up there, particularly an old woman, it's best to keep your distance." Stefan laughed. "What, is there some crazy hermit living up there?" Carl didn't smile back. "Something like that. Locals call her Agnes Crawford. Been stories about her for generations. They say she was banished from her community back in the 1920s for practicing witchcraft. Took refuge in the high country. Just folklore, of course." He cleared his throat. "Anyway, make sure you camp only in designated areas and store your food properly. We've had bear activity this season." I exchanged glances with Eliza, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The warning about bears seemed more concrete than vague warnings about an ancient witch, but something in Carl's tone left me uneasy. We shouldered our packs and hit the trail by mid-afternoon. The weather was perfect. Cool October air, clear skies, and the aspens displaying brilliant yellow against the evergreens. The first 4 miles were pleasant enough with steady elevation gain, but nothing too strenuous. We took photos, pointed out interesting plants and rock formations, and for a while, it felt exactly like the refreshing outdoor experience Marcus had promised. As we climbed higher, the forest grew denser, the pines closing in around the narrowing trail. By dusk, we reached our first designated campsite, a small clearing with a fire ring near Soldier Creek. We set up our tents. Marcus and Stefan took one. Diana had her own, and Eliza and I shared ours. That first night around the campfire was actually enjoyable. We roasted hot dogs and marshmallows, passed around a flask of whiskey, and shared the kind of personal stories that never come up during office hours. Diana surprised us all by revealing she'd spent a year teaching English in rural Japan before switching to data science. Stefan, for once, listened more than he talked. Eliza leaned against my shoulder, laughing at Marcus's exaggerated tales of previous wilderness adventures. "Did you guys know this area has some of the darkest skies in the Midwest?" Marcus said, gesturing upward where stars were beginning to emerge. "Perfect for stargazing." Also perfect for getting murdered without witnesses, Diana deadpanned, making us all laugh. Don't worry, Stefan said with a smirk. If a serial killer shows up, I'll just outrun all of you. That's not how teamwork works, Stefan, Eliza replied, rolling her eyes. The conversation drifted to local legends, and I mentioned what the ranger had told us about Agnes Crawford, the supposed witch of Pine Ridge. Every wilderness has a boogeyman story, Marcus said dismissively. It keeps tourists on the trails and children from wandering too far from home. I don't know, Diana said quietly. There's usually some grain of truth to these legends. I looked up this area before we came. There have been a surprising number of disappearances over the years. People get lost in the wilderness all the time, Stefan countered. They go off trail, run out of water, twist an ankle. No witches required. We all nodded in agreement, but I noticed how the mood had subtly shifted. We stared into the fire a bit longer, each lost in our own thoughts, before turning in for the night. I awoke sometime in the early morning hours to the sound of rustling outside our tent. Probably just an animal, I thought, until I heard something else. A soft, melodic humming that seemed to float on the breeze. I carefully extricated myself from the sleeping bag without waking Eliza and unzipped the tent just enough to peer out. The campsite was washed in pale moonlight. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then, movement caught my eye. A figure standing at the tree line, partially obscured by shadows. It appeared to be a woman, tall and thin, her hair loose around her shoulders. She stood perfectly still, facing our campsite. Even from a distance, I could feel her gaze. "Hello," I called softly, not wanting to wake the others if this was just another camper. The humming stopped. The figure remained motionless for another moment, then slowly retreated backward into the trees without turning around, seeming to melt into the darkness. I zipped the tent closed and lay back down, my heart racing. Had I actually seen someone? Or was it just shadows playing tricks? Eventually, I drifted back to sleep, dismissing it as my imagination working overtime after the witch stories. The next morning, I mentioned it casually over breakfast. Probably just a deer, Marcus said, pouring coffee from his camp percolator. They get curious about human campsites. Since when do deer hum? I asked. Did you actually hear humming, or did you dream it? Eliza asked reasonably. I couldn't be certain anymore. I guess I could have been half asleep. We packed up and continued our journey, following the trail as it wound higher into the hills. The path grew steeper, rougher, with sections where recent rains had washed away parts of the trail. The trees crowded closer, branches interlocking overhead to create a green tunnel that occasionally opened to reveal breathtaking views of the rolling Nebraska landscape below. Around noon, Stefan checked his phone. That's weird. No signal, but my battery's already down to 20%. I charged it fully before we left yesterday. Diana pulled out her phone, too. Same here, and it feels hot. We all checked our devices and found the same issue. Rapidly draining batteries despite minimal use. Marcus shrugged it off as a coincidence, but I caught Diana and Eliza exchanging concerned glances. By mid-afternoon, we reached a fork in the trail not marked on our map. A weathered wooden sign pointed in two directions. One toward Crow Butte, as expected, the other toward Crawford Hollow. Crawford, Stefan repeated. Like the witch the ranger mentioned? Agnes Crawford? Pure coincidence, Marcus insisted. It's probably named after the town of Crawford nearby. We took the path toward Crow Butte as planned, but the trail quickly became more difficult to follow, overgrown in places as if rarely used. After an hour of increasingly challenging hiking, we emerged into a small valley nestled between hills. A cabin stood in the center, old but maintained with smoke curling from its stone chimney. This can't be right, Marcus muttered, consulting the map. There shouldn't be any structures here. This is protected forest land. Maybe it's a ranger station, Eliza suggested. As we debated whether to approach or bypass the cabin, the door opened. An elderly woman emerged, Her silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, her tall frame slightly stooped with age but still commanding. She wore a long, dark dress that seemed out of place in the wilderness and carried a basket of what looked like herbs. She spotted us immediately and raised a hand in greeting, then beckoned us closer. "I don't like this," Diana whispered. "We should go around." "Don't be ridiculous," Stefan said. "She's just an old lady. Probably been living off the grid for years. Might be interesting to talk to her." Marcus hesitated, then nodded. "We can at least ask for directions. The trail isn't matching our map anymore." We approached cautiously. Up close, the woman's age was harder to determine. Her face was lined, but her eyes were startlingly clear, an unusual amber color that seemed to catch the light. "Visitors," she said. Her voice stronger than her appearance suggested. "How unusual. You must be tired from your journey. I'm Agnes." My stomach dropped. Agnes, the same name as the witch from the ranger's warning. But surely it was just a coincidence. There must be thousands of women named Agnes in the country. "We're just passing through," Marcus explained. "Seems we've gotten a bit off trail." "There's a storm coming," Agnes said, looking at the sky, though it remained perfectly clear. "You won't make it to your destination before nightfall. You're welcome to shelter here." As if on cue, I felt the first drop of rain, then another. Looking up, I was startled to see dark clouds gathering overhead that hadn't been there moments before. "That's very kind," Stefan said before anyone else could respond. "But we really need to reach our campsite before dark." Agnes smiled, revealing teeth that seemed too perfect, too white for a woman her age living in the wilderness. "Of course. But first, perhaps some tea to warm you before you continue? The rain will pass quickly." Something felt wrong, but I couldn't articulate what. The rational part of my mind said she was just a harmless old woman living in an unauthorized cabin. Yet everything about the situation, the unmarked fork in the trail, the cabin that wasn't on any map, the sudden appearance of rain, felt orchestrated. "I think we should," I began, but Diana cut me off. "Thank you, that would be lovely," she said, her voice strangely flat. I glanced at her, surprised by her sudden change of heart, and noticed her eyes seemed slightly unfocused. Agnes's smile widened. "Excellent. Please, come in." The interior of the cabin was larger than it appeared from outside, filled with dried plants hanging from rafters, shelves of glass jars containing unidentifiable substances, and furniture that looked handcrafted from local wood. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. Agnes busied herself preparing tea while we sat awkwardly at her rough-hewn table. I tried to catch Eliza's eye, but she seemed distracted, examining a collection of small animal bones arranged on a nearby shelf. "Your friend has good taste," Agnes commented, noticing Eliza's interest. "Those are from special creatures. They whisper secrets at night." Marcus cleared his throat. "So, you live out here alone? Must get lonely." "I'm never truly alone," Agnes replied cryptically, placing mismatched cups in front of each of us. The tea she poured was dark red, almost like wine, with an aroma that reminded me of fermented berries and something medicinal. Diana immediately picked up her cup and took a sip. Her eyes widened slightly, but she said nothing. "It's my special blend," Agnes said. "Helps clear the mind, reveals things as they truly are." Alarm bells rang in my head. I pretended to drink but kept my lips closed. Beside me, I saw Eliza do the same. Marcus took a small sip, then set his cup down. But Stefan drank deeply. "This is amazing," he said. "What's in it?" "Family secret," Agnes replied. "Passed down through generations of Crawford women." There it was again. Confirmation that she was indeed Agnes Crawford, the supposed witch from local legend. I felt increasingly uneasy. "We should get going," I said, standing abruptly. "The rain seems to be letting up." Indeed, the sound of raindrops on the roof had diminished, though I couldn't remember when it had started raining hard enough to be audible inside. Agnes's expression hardened momentarily before smoothing into a pleasant smile. "Of course. But you're welcome to return if you find yourselves lost again. These woods can be confusing for outsiders." We thanked her and hastily exited. Once outside, I was surprised to see the ground was barely wet, as if only a light sprinkle had fallen despite the heavy rain I'd heard. "Let's get moving," I urged. "We need to find the proper trail before dark." Diana moved sluggishly, her coordination slightly off. "I feel strange," she murmured. "Everything looks different." "You'll be fine," Marcus assured her. "Just a bit of dehydration, probably. Drink some water." We continued hiking, following what appeared to be a trail leading away from the cabin. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees growing impossibly tall and dense. The afternoon light filtered strangely through the canopy, creating patterns that seemed to shift and move even when the branches were still. After an hour of walking, Stefan stopped abruptly. "We're going in circles." "That's impossible," Marcus said. "We've been walking in a straight line, following the trail." "Look," Stefan pointed to a distinctive fallen log. "We passed that 30 minutes ago. I remember because I thought it looked like a crocodile." He was right. I recognized it too. "Let me check the GPS," Marcus said, pulling out his phone. The screen was black. Dead. Everyone else? We all checked our phones. All dead. "This isn't normal," Eliza said quietly. "Something's wrong." Diana had been unusually quiet. Now she spoke, her voice dreamy and distant. "She's watching us. She wants us to come back." "Who? Agnes?" I asked. Diana nodded slowly, her eyes unfocused. "She's lonely. She needs new friends." "Snap out of it," Marcus said sharply, grabbing Diana's shoulders. "Whatever was in that tea is affecting you." "I don't feel so good either," Stefan admitted, his face pale. "Everything's moving." The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows through the trees. We needed shelter for the night, but the thought of returning to Agnes's cabin filled me with dread. "We need to find a clearing and set up camp," Marcus decided. "In the morning, we'll get our bearings and find our way back to the marked trail." We picked a spot that seemed suitable, though the ground was oddly spongy beneath our feet. As we unpacked our tents, I noticed Diana wandering toward the tree line. "Diana," I called, "stay with the group." She turned slowly, but her expression wasn't her own. Her normally alert eyes were vacant, her mouth curved in a smile I'd never seen on her face before. "She's calling me," Diana said. "Don't you hear it? The humming?" A chill ran down my spine as I remembered the humming I'd heard the previous night. Before anyone could react, Diana turned and sprinted into the woods with surprising speed. "Diana!" Eliza shouted, already running after her. Marcus, Stefan, and I followed, crashing through underbrush, calling Diana's name. The forest seemed to swallow our voices, the trees absorbing the sound. The light faded rapidly, darkness gathering beneath the pines. After 10 minutes of desperate searching, we regrouped, panting and frightened. "We need to split up," Marcus suggested. "Cover more ground." "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "Haven't you seen horror movies? We stay together." "This isn't a movie, Tom," Marcus snapped. "Diana is out there, possibly hallucinating from whatever that old woman gave her." "All the more reason to stick together," Eliza insisted. "If we split up, we could all get lost." Stefan had been unusually quiet. Now I noticed he was staring fixedly at something behind me. I turned to look and saw nothing but darkening forest. "Stefan, what do you see?" "She's there," he whispered, standing between the trees. "She's smiling at me." I saw nothing but shadows. "There's no one there, Stefan." "I need to go to her," he said, taking a step forward. Marcus grabbed his arm. "Don't you dare. Whatever you're seeing isn't real." Night was falling rapidly now. With no choice but to temporarily abandon our search for Diana, we decided to head back to our packs and set up camp. We would resume looking for Diana at first light. Except we couldn't find our way back to our packs. "This is insane," Marcus said after another hour of wandering. "We can't be more than a quarter-mile from our campsite." Yet everything looked unfamiliar in the deepening darkness. The trees seemed to have closed ranks around us, forming an impenetrable maze. Our flashlights cast weak pools of light that barely penetrated the gloom. "We need to stop," Eliza said eventually. "We're just getting more lost." We had our small day packs with minimal supplies, some water, energy bars, a lightweight emergency blanket in Marcus's case. We huddled together at the base of a large pine, sharing the blanket and what little food we had. None of us slept much. Strange sounds echoed through the darkness, cracking branches that sounded too deliberate to be wildlife, and occasionally the same melodic humming I'd heard the night before. Stefan grew increasingly agitated, insisting he could see figures moving among the trees. By morning, his eyes were wild, his speech scattered. "She showed me things," he kept saying. "In the tea. I saw what she really is, what's under her skin." As dawn filtered through the canopy, we assessed our situation. 2 members of our party were now compromised, Diana missing entirely, Stefan apparently hallucinating. Our phones were dead, we had no map, and we seemed unable to navigate even short distances without getting turned around. "We need to find high ground," Marcus said, attempting to take charge, though I could see fear bleeding through his confident facade. "Get above the tree line if possible. Look for landmarks or signs of the trail." It seemed like a reasonable plan. We helped Stefan to his feet. He was unsteady, his eyes constantly darting around, and began hiking uphill. After what felt like hours of climbing, we emerged onto a rocky outcropping that provided a view of the surrounding landscape. What we saw made no sense. The forest stretched in all directions, unbroken by roads or clearings. In the distance, mountains rose that hadn't been visible before, jagged peaks that didn't match the rolling hills of western Nebraska. "This is impossible," Eliza whispered. "Where are we?" I had no answer. Nothing looked familiar. It was as if we'd been transported to another place entirely. "We need to go back," Stefan said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been since drinking the tea. "Back to Agnes. She's the only way out." "Are you insane?" Marcus demanded. "She's the one who did this to us." "Exactly," Stefan insisted. "So she's the only one who can undo it. Don't you get it? We're not lost in the normal sense. This isn't even real anymore." A horrible thought occurred to me. What if we never left her cabin? What if this is all some kind of hallucination? Eliza gripped my hand tightly. "No, this is real. We're really here." But doubt clouded her eyes. "I can find the way back to her," Stefan said with unnerving certainty. "She's showing me." With no better options, we reluctantly followed Stefan as he descended from the outcropping, moving with newfound purpose through the trees. His behavior was increasingly concerning. He would stop occasionally, head tilted as if listening to something none of us could hear, then abruptly change direction. Around midday, we found Diana's backpack hanging from a branch, its contents scattered across the forest floor. Her sleeping bag was there, ripped open as if something had clawed through it. Her clothes were strewn about, some torn, others arranged in an unsettling pattern. "This isn't random," Eliza said, examining the scene. "It looks ritualistic." Stefan nodded eagerly. "She's preparing. We need to hurry." "Preparing for what?" I demanded, but Stefan just shook his head and continued walking. As the day wore on, the forest changed subtly around us. The trees grew more gnarled, their bark darkening to an almost black hue. Fungus in unnatural colors, vivid purples and sickly yellows, sprouted from rotting logs. The air grew thick and humid despite the October chill that should have prevailed at this elevation. We started finding items from our original campsite, Marcus's specialized cooking pot hanging from a branch, my hiking boots, though I was still wearing my own, placed carefully in the center of the path. Each item was positioned deliberately, like breadcrumbs leading us onward. By late afternoon, Stefan stopped at the edge of a clearing. "We're here." Before us stood Agnes's cabin, exactly as we had left it, smoke still curling from the chimney. But something was different. The surrounding trees seemed to bend toward it, their branches creating a canopy overhead. The ground around the cabin was covered in strange symbols etched into the dirt. "I'm not going in there," Eliza said firmly. "We have to," Stefan insisted. "Diana's inside." "How do you know that?" Marcus demanded. Stefan tapped his temple. "She told me. In here." Before we could stop him, Stefan strode forward, crossing the clearing toward the cabin. We called after him, but he didn't turn back. As he reached the door, it swung open of its own accord. Agnes stood in the doorway, exactly as before, but now her smile seemed predatory. "You've returned," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. "I knew you would. The others always do." Stefan entered without hesitation. The door closed behind him. "We need to get out of here," Marcus said, backing away. "Right now." "What about Diana and Stefan?" Eliza asked. "They're already gone," Marcus said grimly. "We'll be next if we don't run." I knew he was right, but I couldn't bear the thought of abandoning our friends. "Maybe we can help them. There are 3 of us and only 1 of her." "Are you sure about that?" Eliza whispered, pointing. Around the perimeter of the clearing, partially hidden by trees and undergrowth, stood figures, human-shaped but somehow wrong. They were perfectly still, watching us. I counted 5, then 8, then stopped counting as I realized there were dozens of them. "Oh, God," Marcus breathed. "What are they?" As if in answer, one figure stepped forward into a shaft of sunlight. It was Diana, but not Diana. Her movements were stiff, mechanical. Her eyes, once sharp and intelligent, were now dull and vacant. Her skin had a grayish cast, and something dark seemed to move beneath it, like shadows flowing under her flesh. "Join us," she said, her voice a hollow approximation of her normal speech. "Agnes has so much to show you, so much to share." More figures emerged, hikers by their clothing, of varying ages, in different states of decomposition. Some looked almost normal. Others were little more than animated corpses, their flesh rotting on their bones. "Run," Marcus whispered. "Now." We turned and fled back into the forest, not caring which direction we went as long as it was away from the cabin and its grotesque guardians. Behind us, I heard movement. Not the crashing pursuit I expected, but a steady, patient following. They didn't need to rush. They knew these woods, knew we couldn't escape. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs threatened to give out. The forest grew darker around us, though it should have been hours yet until sunset. Time itself seemed distorted. "We need to find the trail," Marcus gasped between breaths. "The real trail, back to civilization." But every path we took seemed to circle back toward the cabin. The trees themselves appeared to move when we weren't looking directly at them, closing off roots and opening new ones that inevitably led back to Agnes. Night fell with unnatural swiftness. Our flashlights, which had been dead earlier, now worked again but cast strange shadows that seemed to move independently of the objects casting them. We huddled together in a small hollow between tree roots, too exhausted to continue running. "What is she?" Eliza whispered. "What does she want?" "I think," I said slowly, "she's been taking people for a long time. That's why there are so many disappearances in these woods. She collects them somehow." "But why?" Marcus asked. "What for?" Before I could speculate, we heard humming, that same melodic tune that had haunted my dreams. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, surrounding us. Through the trees, we saw lights approaching. Not flashlights, but a soft, yellowish glow like candle flames. The figures from the clearing were coming, moving in a loose circle around us, gradually tightening their formation. "This can't be happening," Eliza moaned. "This can't be real." But it was happening. And somewhere deep inside, I knew it was real, despite how impossible it seemed. Marcus suddenly stood up. "I'm going to create a diversion. When I do, you two run. Pick a direction and just go. Don't stop until you reach a road, a town, anything." "Marcus, no," I began, but he cut me off. "It's our only chance. One of us has to make it out to get help." Before we could stop him, Marcus grabbed a fallen branch, lit it from his emergency fire starter, and charged toward the approaching figures, waving the makeshift torch and shouting at the top of his lungs. The circle of figures parted momentarily, surprised by the direct assault. Eliza and I seized the opportunity, running in the opposite direction, crashing through underbrush, ignoring the branches that tore at our clothes and skin. Behind us, Marcus's shouts turned to screams, horrible, agonized sounds that cut off abruptly. We ran blindly through the darkness, holding hands to avoid being separated. The humming followed us, growing louder, more insistent. Occasionally, we glimpsed movement in our peripheral vision, figures pacing us just beyond the reach of our flashlight beams. After what felt like hours, we stumbled onto a gravel road. Narrow, overgrown, but definitely man-made. Hope surged through me. "Follow it," I gasped. "It has to lead somewhere." We hurried along the road, our pace quickening despite our exhaustion. The humming receded slightly, though I still felt watched. The road led to a small, abandoned ranger station. Its windows boarded up, its paint peeling, but unmistakably a structure built by the National Park Service. A sign hung from the door. "Closed, permanently due to budget cuts." "We can barricade ourselves inside," Eliza suggested. "Wait until morning." It wasn't much of a plan, but it was better than continuing through the forest in darkness. We broke a window, cleared away enough glass to climb through, and found ourselves in a dusty interior that smelled of mold and abandonment. Using the feeble light of our flashlights, we explored the station. It consisted of a main room with a counter, an office area, and a small bathroom. The power was long disconnected, but we found some emergency supplies, additional flashlights, bottles of water, and some vacuum-sealed emergency rations that had expired years ago but seemed intact. Most importantly, we found a two-way radio. It was an older model, powered by batteries rather than electricity. With trembling hands, I switched it on, praying it would work. Miraculously, a power light appeared. I adjusted the frequency to the emergency channel and pressed the talk button. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Thomas Callahan. My partner Eliza Parker and I are trapped in Pine Ridge National Forest. We need immediate assistance. 3 of our party are missing, presumed." I hesitated, unsure how to describe what had happened. "In danger. Please respond." Static crackled from the speaker. Then, faintly, a voice replied, "This is Ranger Station Alpha. We're receiving you, but your signal is weak. Can you provide your location?" Hope surged through me. "We're in an abandoned ranger station. I don't know exactly where, somewhere near Crow Butte and Crawford Hollow." More static then. "Did you say Crawford Hollow? That area's been closed to hikers for decades. How did you get there?" "We got lost," I explained. "Please, we need help. There's someone out here, a woman named Agnes Crawford. She's dangerous. She's done something to our friends." A long pause followed. When the voice returned, it sounded different. Tense, cautious. "Stay where you are. Do not leave the station. We'll send a search team at first light. Over." "First light will be too late," Eliza shouted into the microphone. "She's coming for us now." But there was no response, just empty static. We barricaded the doors and windows as best we could with the limited furniture available. Then we settled in to wait, taking turns keeping watch while the other tried to rest. During my watch, I noticed something disturbing. The dust on the floor of the station had been undisturbed when we entered, except for our own footprints. But now I saw other tracks appearing. small impressions forming one by one as if invisible feet were walking across the room. "Eliza," I whispered urgently, "wake up." She stirred, then sat up quickly when she saw my expression. I pointed to the dust. Together, we watched as the invisible footprints moved around the room, circling us. The humming started again, louder now, coming from inside the station itself. The temperature dropped dramatically, our breath forming clouds in the suddenly frigid air. "She found us," Eliza whispered. The door we had barricaded began to rattle, then shake violently. The windows, though boarded, banged in their frames as if struck by hurricane winds. Our flashlight beams flickered, dimmed, then died completely, plunging us into darkness broken only by faint moonlight filtering through cracks in the boarded windows. In that dim light, I saw the air shimmer in the center of the room. A figure began to take shape. Not Agnes herself, but Diana, or what had once been Diana. Her skin glowed faintly from within, her eyes completely black. When she opened her mouth to speak, I saw darkness where her throat should have been. "Agnes is waiting," she said, her voice echoing strangely as if coming from far away. "You can't escape. No one ever does." "What happened to you, Diana?" Eliza asked, her voice breaking. "What did she do to you?" Diana's head tilted at an impossible angle. She showed me what I truly am, what we all are underneath. She'll show you, too. She moved toward us with unnatural speed. I pushed Eliza behind me, grabbing the only weapon available, a heavy metal flashlight. "Stay back," I warned, brandishing it. Diana smiled, revealing teeth that had elongated into sharp points. "It doesn't hurt, not for long, and then you understand. You see everything clearly." She lunged forward. I swung the flashlight, connecting with her head. There was a sickening crack, but Diana didn't fall. Instead, her neck bent at an impossible angle, her head nearly touching her shoulder. Slowly, unnaturally, it rotated back into position. "That wasn't nice. Thomas," she said, her voice deepening, taking on harmonics that no human voice should have. "Agnes won't like that." The windows shattered inward, glass exploding across the room. Through the openings crawled more figures. Stefan, Marcus, others I didn't recognize. All moved with the same wrong fluidity. All had the same darkness shifting beneath their skin. Eliza screamed as Marcus grabbed her arm, his fingers elongating, seeming to melt into her flesh. I tried to pull her free but felt cold hands grasping me from behind. Stefan, his face split in a too-wide grin. "She's waiting," he whispered in my ear. "Don't fight it. It's better when you don't fight." I struggled desperately, but there were too many of them. They dragged us out of the station back into the night forest. I could see Eliza being carried ahead of me, no longer fighting, her body limp. "Eliza!" I shouted, renewed strength surging through me. I managed to break one arm free, elbowing what had once been Stefan in the face. His skin gave way too easily under the impact, like striking wet clay. I fought with everything I had, kicking, biting, clawing. For a moment, I broke free entirely and stumbled a few steps before hands grasped me again, more firmly this time. I felt a sharp pain at the base of my skull, then darkness. I awoke to flickering firelight. For a disorienting moment, I thought I was back at our first campsite, that everything had been a nightmare. Then I recognized my surroundings. Agnes's cabin, but transformed. The interior had expanded impossibly, the ceiling now soaring 20 feet overhead. The walls were lined with shelves containing hundreds of jars, each filled with something that pulsed and shifted in the unsteady light. I was bound to a chair, thick rope cutting into my wrists and ankles. Across from me, Eliza was similarly restrained, still unconscious. Her skin had a sickly pallor, and dark lines traced the veins in her arms and neck. Agnes stood at a large wooden table, grinding something in a mortar. She no longer maintained the appearance of a normal elderly woman. Her silver hair now floated around her head as if underwater, moving with a life of its own. Her fingers had elongated, the joints multiplying so each digit bent in 4 places instead of 3. When she turned to look at me, her eyes were completely black, like pools of oil. "Awake at last," she said, her voice resonating with multiple tones simultaneously. I was beginning to think Marcus had struck you too hard. I turned my head painfully and saw Marcus standing in the corner, motionless as a statue. His face was partially collapsed on one side, as if the bones beneath the skin had softened. Behind him stood Diana, Stefan, and at least a dozen others, all in various states of transformation, all watching me with those same black eyes. "What are you?" I rasped, my throat painfully dry. Agnes smiled, revealing teeth that had grown into needle-like points. "I am Agnes Crawford. That much is true. But I am also much more, much older. The Pawnee who first lived in these lands had another name for me. Before the white settlers came. They left offerings to keep me appeased. Food, animals, occasionally a person." She approached, leaning down to examine me closely. Her breath smelled of rotting vegetation and copper. "When the settlers arrived, they drove out the Pawnee and stopped the offerings. They didn't believe in the old spirits, so I had to find other ways to sustain myself." "You're not real," I insisted, though I knew it was a lie even as I said it. "This is all some kind of hallucination from your tea." Agnes laughed, a sound like wind through dead leaves. "Is that what you need to believe? The tea merely opens the mind to truth, allows you to see beyond the veil you humans draw across reality to protect your fragile sanity." She gestured toward Eliza. "Your companion is fighting the change. That makes it more painful, but she'll surrender eventually. They all do." "Don't touch her," I warned, straining against my bonds. "Let her go." "Or what?" Agnes asked, amused. "You'll tell the rangers about the witch in the woods? Many have tried. Those who manage to escape are never believed. They're diagnosed with exposure, dehydration, traumatic delusions. The lucky ones spend years in psychiatric facilities. The unlucky ones return to me, drawn back by what I placed inside them." She tapped her chest. "A small piece of myself, growing gradually until it's ready to blossom." She turned back to her work, adding ingredients to a bubbling cauldron on the hearth. "I'm actually doing you a favor. Human existence is so limited. A brief flicker of awareness before extinction. What I offer is continuation, transformation. The flesh fails, but consciousness persists. As your puppets," I said bitterly. "Slaves." "Parts of a greater whole," she corrected. "Individual consciousness is an illusion anyway, a quirk of evolution that makes animals believe they're separate from their environment." The ingredients in the cauldron hissed and popped. Agnes stirred the mixture with one elongated finger, which she then placed in her mouth, tasting the concoction. "Almost ready," she murmured. Across from me, Eliza stirred, groaning softly. Her eyes fluttered open, still her normal blue, not yet the bottomless black of Agnes's thralls. "Tom?" she whispered, voice cracking. "I'm here," I answered, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "Don't fight, Eliza. Whatever they do to you, don't resist." Agnes raised an eyebrow. "Interesting advice. Most beg their loved ones to fight to the end." "Because fighting makes it worse," I said, remembering what Agnes's puppet Stefan had whispered to me. "It's better when you don't fight." Agnes smiled, impressed. "You're cleverer than most. Yes, resistance creates disharmony. The transition is smoother when embraced." I had no plan beyond keeping her talking, but something caught my eye. The rope binding my right wrist had frayed slightly where it rubbed against a rough edge of the wooden chair. If I could create enough friction. "So, what happens after the transition?" I asked, subtly working my wrist back and forth. "We just join your collection? Help you lure more victims?" "For a time," Agnes said, ladling her concoction into 2 earthenware cups. "Eventually, when the physical form deteriorates beyond usefulness, You join with me more. Completely. She gestured toward the walls, and I realized with horror that the pulsing substances in the jars weren't ingredients. They were what remained of her previous victims. Those who resist end up aware but trapped, consciousness without agency, forever. Those who embrace the change enjoy a more privileged status. They retain more of themselves in the collective. She approached Eliza first, cup in hand. "Open," she commanded. Eliza kept her mouth firmly closed, turning her head away. Agnes sighed, then nodded to Marcus and Diana. They moved forward with that same wrong fluidity, grasping Eliza's head and forcing her jaw open. "No!" I shouted, redoubling my efforts to free my wrist. The rope was definitely looser now, the fibers separating. Agnes poured the dark liquid into Eliza's mouth. Marcus clamped her jaw shut, pinching her nose closed, forcing her to swallow. Eliza's eyes widened in panic, then glazed over as the concoction took effect. "Your turn," Agnes said, turning to me with the second cup. "Will you resist or submit?" The rope around my right wrist finally gave way. I kept my arm in position, not revealing my partial freedom. If I submit, what happens to Eliza? You would be together, after a fashion, parts of the same whole. Agnes moved closer, cup extended. And if I had something to offer? Something more valuable than just another body? Agnes paused, curious. Such as? "I know why your collection has been shrinking over the years," I improvised. "Why you have to work harder to find new subjects. The Forest Service has been treating the area with chemicals. Herbicides. They're poisoning your power source." It was complete nonsense, but Agnes seemed intrigued. "Explain." "I work for the EPA," I lied. "Environmental Protection Agency. The chemicals are in the groundwater now. It's why some of your thralls are deteriorating faster than they should." I nodded toward Marcus, whose face seemed more collapsed than before. Agnes frowned, considering. "And you know how to counteract this poison?" "I can identify it. Tell you how to neutralize it." I made my expression earnest, desperate. "Let Eliza go, and I'll help you. Voluntarily. No need for your potion." Agnes laughed. "Do you think I was born yesterday? Or even in the last century?" She leaned close, her face inches from mine. "I've heard every bargain, every plea, every desperate lie. None have worked." As she moved to force the cup to my lips, I made my move. My free hand shot up, knocking the cup away and grasping Agnes's wrist. It felt wrong under my fingers. Not solid bone and flesh, but something shifting and malleable. Agnes shrieked, a sound no human throat could produce, high and piercing enough to rattle the jars on the shelves. The thralls all moved at once, converging on me. But in that moment of confusion, I managed to free my other hand and lunged forward, tackling Agnes to the ground. Up close, her glamour faltered. Beneath the human appearance, I glimpsed something ancient and alien. A writhing mass of darkness partially bound in human form. Her face rippled, features melting and reforming. "You dare," she hissed, her voice now completely inhuman, a chittering, insectile sound. My mind screamed to recoil, to run, but I forced myself to maintain my grip. Whatever Agnes truly was, she still inhabited a partially physical form. And physical forms could be damaged. My eyes landed on the iron fireplace poker leaning against the hearth. In folklore, iron was often the bane of supernatural creatures. It was a desperate hope, but the only one I had. I rolled, narrowly avoiding Marcus's grasping hands, and lunged for the poker. My fingers closed around the cool metal as Agnes rose from the floor, her form now fluctuating wildly between human and something else. Something with too many limbs, too many eyes. "You cannot harm me," she snarled. "I am eternal. I was here before your kind walked upright. I will be here long after your civilization crumbles to dust." I swung the poker with all my strength, aiming for where her heart would be if she were human. The iron connected with a sound like tearing fabric. Agnes screamed, black ichor spraying from the wound. She staggered backward, her form destabilizing further. The thralls froze in place as if uncertain what to do without Agnes's direct control. I used the moment to strike again, and again. Each blow caused Agnes to lose more of her human appearance, more of the darkness that composed her true form spilling out into the air where it dissipated like smoke. "What have you done?" she shrieked, her voice now a cacophony of sounds, human and animal and something else entirely. "What have you done?" The cabin itself began to shake, the walls bending inward as if the structure was collapsing in on itself. The jars on the shelves shattered, releasing their contents, wisps of glowing vapor that swirled through the air. I fought my way to Eliza, still bound to her chair but now slumped forward, unconscious. With the poker, I severed her bonds and hoisted her over my shoulder. All around us, Agnes's thralls were changing, some collapsing into piles of decaying matter, others standing rigidly as the black substance beneath their skin boiled out through their eyes and mouths. Agnes herself was barely recognizable as humanoid now, a writhing column of darkness punctuated by too many eyes, too many mouths, all screaming in different voices. "You haven't won," she rasped as I staggered toward the door with Eliza. "Part of me is already inside both of you. You'll never be free. You'll return to me." They all return. I didn't waste breath responding. The door hung askew on broken hinges. I kicked it open and stumbled into the night. The forest around the cabin was transforming too, trees twisting into impossible shapes, the ground rippling like water. Reality itself seemed to be unraveling. I ran blindly, carrying Eliza, following no path but away. Behind us, the cabin imploded with a sound like reality tearing, a flash of light that cast no shadows, and then silence so absolute it felt like a physical pressure. I kept running until my legs gave out. I collapsed in a small clearing, gently laying Eliza on the ground. Her breathing was shallow but steady, her skin still traced with dark lines but less pronounced than before. The night passed in a haze of fear and exhaustion. I didn't sleep, couldn't sleep, keeping watch over Eliza and starting at every sound in the forest. But as dawn approached, the woods seemed to have returned to normal, just trees and undergrowth, birds beginning their morning songs. Eliza stirred as the first rays of sunlight filtered through the canopy. Her eyes opened, still blue. Still hers. "Tom?" she whispered, confused. "What happened? Where are we?" I helped her sit up, searching her face for any sign of Agnes's influence. "What do you remember?" She frowned, concentrating. The tea. Agnes forcing me to drink something else. Then darkness. Voices. So many voices all speaking at once. She shuddered. Was it real? All of it? "I don't know," I admitted. "But it's over now." It took us most of the day to find our way back to a marked trail. As the forest thinned, we spotted a search and rescue team in the distance, the response to our radio call. We were taken to a hospital in Crawford, treated for dehydration, exposure, and various cuts and bruises. When we told our story, we were met with sympathetic but skeptical looks. The search teams found no cabin, no Agnes Crawford, no sign of Marcus, Stefan, or Diana. They did find our original campsite and the abandoned ranger station exactly where we described it. The official report concluded that our friends had become lost and separated from us, likely victims of exposure or wildlife. The search continued for weeks, but eventually scaled back to periodic sweeps. They were officially listed as missing, presumed dead. Eliza and I recovered physically, but the psychological wounds ran deeper. We stayed together, united by an experience no one else could understand. We moved away from Omaha, away from Nebraska entirely, settling in Portland, Oregon, about as far from Pine Ridge as we could get while staying in the continental U.S. But Agnes's final words haunt me. Some nights I wake to find Eliza standing at our bedroom window. staring out into the darkness, humming that same melodic tune I first heard in the woods. When I call her name, she always turns slowly, blinking as if awakening from a trance, with no memory of how she got there. And sometimes, catching my reflection in a mirror or window, I see something move beneath my skin, a shadow that shifts when I'm not looking directly at it, a darkness that doesn't belong. Agnes was right about one thing. Part of her is inside us, and I fear that one day it will call us back to Pine Ridge, back to that hollow between the hills where reality wears thin, where she waits, rebuilding her strength, gathering her collection once more. Because in my darkest moments, I understand now what Agnes truly was. Not a witch, not a spirit, but something that has existed in the hidden corners of our world since before humans walked the earth. Something that wears human form like a costume, that feeds on consciousness itself. And the most terrifying realization of all, she is not unique. There are others like her out there, ancient and patient, wearing human faces, waiting in remote places for unwary travelers to stumble into their domains. So, this is my warning. If you're hiking in western Nebraska and come across an unmarked fork in the trail, or a cabin that shouldn't exist, or hear humming in the woods when no one is there, run. Don't look back. Don't stop until you reach civilization. And even then, check your reflection occasionally. Watch for shadows that move beneath your skin, because Agnes Crawford is still collecting, and she never truly lets anyone go. My name is James Whitaker. This happened in August 2024. I'm writing this down because I need someone to believe me. I need to make sense of what happened in those woods. The doctors say writing will help with the trauma, but they don't understand that some wounds go deeper than flesh. I was 34 when I decided to take a solo hiking trip through Pine Ridge in northwestern Nebraska. My girlfriend of 6 years, Vanessa, had just left me for her CrossFit instructor, a predictable cliché that somehow hurt no less for its banality. I'd spent 10 years behind a computer screen coding for a finance company in Chicago, and I thought connecting with nature might help me reconnect with myself. What a fucking joke! I'd chosen Nebraska specifically because no one thinks of it as a hiking destination. Everyone flocks to Colorado or Wyoming, but Nebraska has its own rugged beauty, especially around Crow Butte and the Nebraska National Forest. The Pine Ridge area offers challenging trails with breathtaking views across the plains and isolated woods that stretch for miles. I wanted isolation, and I got it. Far more than I bargained for. The first 2 days were exactly what I needed. The September air was crisp, but not cold. The trails moderately challenging for my desk job physique. I set up camp near a creek, dutifully hanging my food bag from a tree branch to keep it away from wildlife. I'd done my research online. I'm nothing if not thorough. I had maps, a compass, a high-end GPS device, extra batteries, a satellite phone for emergencies, and enough freeze-dried meals to last a week. I even had a water filtration system that could make creek water potable. I was prepared for everything. Everything except the Blackwoods. I met Marcus Reed on my 3rd day. He emerged from a dense thicket of pines as I was consulting my map at a trail junction. He wore the olive-green uniform of a forest ranger, complete with the flat-brimmed hat. His beard was neatly trimmed, his smile easy and reassuring. "You look a bit turned around there," he said, approaching with his hand extended. "Marcus Reed, Forest Service." I shook his hand, relieved to see another human after days alone with my thoughts. "James Whitaker, just making sure I'm heading toward Crow Butte." He glanced at my map and nodded. "You're on the right track, but there's been some trail damage about 2 miles ahead. Spring floods took out a bridge. Mind if I show you the detour? It's not on the maps yet." I had no reason to distrust him. His uniform looked legitimate, his knowledge of the area extensive. When he mentioned he was heading that way himself to check on some trail markers, I gratefully accepted his company. As we walked, Marcus told me about the area's history, how the limestone formations were millions of years old, how the Lakota considered certain parts sacred, and how settlers had struggled to tame this particular stretch of wilderness. "People have a way of disappearing out here," he said casually. "Not often, mind you, but every few years some hiker goes off trail and is never seen again. Nature doesn't forgive mistakes." "That's comforting," I laughed nervously. "Just stick to the trails and you'll be fine," he assured me. "Though I'd avoid the western ridge if I were you. That's Blackwood territory." "Blackwood?" "Local family. Been here since before Nebraska was a state. They keep to themselves, don't much care for outsiders or the government telling them what to do with their land. They're territorial." The way he said the word sent a chill through me, but I dismissed it. Every rural area has its reclusive families, I figured. Around midday, we reached a clearing where a young woman sat on a fallen log, consulting her own map. She looked up as we approached, her expression brightening. "Oh, thank God, actual people," she said, standing up. She was athletically built, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. Her hiking gear looked well worn, but high quality. I was beginning to think I'd taken a wrong turn. Marcus introduced himself, and I did the same. "Eliza Harmon," she replied, shaking both our hands. "I'm doing a solo trek through Pine Ridge. Day 4 and still alive, which I count as a win." Her self-deprecating humor put me at ease immediately. When Marcus suggested she join us at least until the detour, she readily agreed. As we continued hiking, I learned she was a wildlife photographer from Minneapolis, taking a break between assignments to find something real in the wilderness. By late afternoon, we reached the detour Marcus had mentioned. Sure enough, the remnants of a wooden bridge hung precariously over a deep ravine, the spring floods having taken out its central support. "This is where I leave you to," Marcus said. "I've got to head north to check some trail markers, but the detour is straightforward. Follow the ridge for about a mile. Then take the path down when you see 3 stacked stones. It'll add about an hour to your journey, but it's safer than trying to cross that." He pointed to the destroyed bridge. "Will we see you again?" Eliza asked, and I was glad she did because I'd been wondering the same thing. Something about Marcus's presence was reassuring. "I make my rounds," he said with a smile. "Pine Ridge isn't that big. I'm sure we'll cross paths again before you finish your treks." With that, he tipped his hat and headed north along a barely visible trail. Eliza and I continued along the ridge as instructed. "So," she said after we'd been walking in comfortable silence for a while, "running from something or towards something?" "Is it that obvious?" I asked. "Most people who do solo hikes in obscure wilderness areas are working through something. I know I am." I found myself telling her about Vanessa, about the soul-crushing routine of my job, about feeling disconnected from everything that mattered. She listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally. "What about you?" I finally asked. She hesitated before answering. "Let's just say I saw something on my last assignment that made me question a lot of things. Sometimes you need to get away from people to remember why you care about humanity in the first place." Before I could ask what she meant, we spotted the 3 stacked stones Marcus had mentioned and began our descent back to the main trail. By then, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. "We should make camp," Eliza suggested. "I don't fancy navigating these trails in the dark." We found a suitable clearing about 100 yards from the trail. As I set up my tent, Eliza built a fire pit and soon had a small blaze going. We shared our food. Her dehydrated beef stew was far better than my packaged pasta, and traded stories as night fell completely. The fire cast dancing shadows among the trees, and occasionally we'd hear rustling in the underbrush. Probably small animals, I told myself. But more than once I thought I saw movement just beyond the firelight's reach, a darker shadow moving against the darkness. "Do you feel like we're being watched?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. Eliza glanced around, her expression unreadable in the flickering light. "These woods have eyes," she said after a moment. "Old forests always do?" I might have pressed her on what she meant, but just then my satellite phone emitted a high-pitched squeal that made us both jump. I fumbled for it in my pack, but by the time I pulled it out, the screen was black. Dead. I checked my regular phone, too. No signal, of course. But the battery had also drained completely despite being at 80% just hours earlier. "That's weird," I muttered, showing Eliza. "Both phones died at once." She frowned. "Electronics can act strange out here. Something about the mineral content in the rocks, maybe." That night I slept fitfully in my tent, waking at every snap of a twig or hoot of an owl. Once, I could have sworn I heard whispers just outside my tent, multiple voices speaking too softly to make out words. I told myself it was just the wind through the pines. Morning brought new strangeness. The food in my pack, sealed, store-bought protein bars and trail mix, had spoiled overnight. The trail mix was moldy, the protein bars covered in a slick, dark substance that smelled of rot. Eliza's food was untouched. "That's not normal," she said, examining my ruined supplies. "Here, we can share mine." As we packed up camp, I noticed something else disturbing. Several trees surrounding our campsite now bore strange, crude markings carved into their bark. Symbols I didn't recognize, almost like letters from some ancient alphabet. I was certain they hadn't been there the night before. "Eliza," I called out, pointing to the markings. "Did you see these yesterday?" She approached slowly, her expression darkening as she examined the carvings. "We need to move," she said, her voice suddenly tight. "Now." "What are they?" I asked, hurrying to finish packing my tent. "Warnings, or summoning signs. Either way, we don't want to be here." We set off at a brisk pace, rejoining the main trail. My GPS device, which had worked perfectly the day before, now showed us miles from where we should be, the digital map shifting and changing every time I looked at it. Eventually, I turned it off and stowed it away, relying on the physical map instead. Around noon, we came across a small cabin set back from the trail. Smoke curled from its stone chimney, and a weather-beaten pickup truck sat in what passed for a front yard. An old man in overalls was splitting wood with an axe that looked almost as ancient as he did. He paused as we approached, leaning on his axe handle and regarding us with watery blue eyes nearly hidden in a nest of wrinkles. "You folks lost," he called out, his voice surprisingly strong. "Just passing through," Eliza answered before I could speak. "Heading toward Crow Butte." The old man spat on the ground. "You're headed the wrong way, then. Crow Butte's east of here. You're going west." I checked my compass, confused. "No, we've been heading southeast all morning." The old man's laugh was like dry leaves rustling. "Compasses don't work right around these parts. Something in the ground messes with them." He gestured toward his cabin. "Come on in, I'll show you on my map. Besides, looks like rain's coming." I glanced at the sky, clear blue, not a cloud in sight, but Eliza was already following the old man toward his cabin. Reluctantly, I followed. The cabin's interior was dim and smelled of wood smoke and something else I couldn't identify, something meaty and vaguely sweet. Animal pelts hung from the walls, and a shotgun rested above the stone fireplace. A large, well-worn map was spread across a wooden table. "Name's Samuel," the old man said. "Samuel Blackwood." My heart skipped at the name. Blackwood, the family Marcus had warned us about. "I'm Eliza. This is James," Eliza said, seemingly untroubled. "We appreciate the help." Samuel traced a gnarled finger across the map. "You're here," he said, tapping a spot I didn't recognize. "Crow Butte's way over here. You've been walking deeper into Blackwood territory." The way he said it made it sound like a different country entirely. "We must have taken a wrong turn at the detour," I suggested. "A forest ranger named Marcus Reed told us to follow the ridge after the broken bridge." Something flickered across Samuel's face. Surprise, maybe, or concern. "Ain't been no forest ranger named Reed working these parts for at least 30 years, he said slowly. That's impossible, I protested. We just met him yesterday. Green uniform, ranger hat, beard. Samuel's expression hardened. Son, I've lived in these woods my entire life. I know every official and unofficial person who moves through them. There ain't no Ranger Reed. A heavy silence fell over the cabin. Outside, a rumble of thunder startled me. Somehow, dark clouds had indeed gathered despite the clear sky minutes before. Storm's coming fast, Samuel said, moving to the window. You two best stay here till it passes. My boys will be back soon with dinner. We've got plenty to share. The thought of meeting more Blackwoods made my skin crawl, but the sudden storm left us little choice. Rain began to lash against the windows with unnatural force, and lightning cracked close enough to make the cabin shudder. Eliza seemed strangely calm, examining the pelts on the walls. You're quite the hunter, Mr. Blackwood. Call me Samuel, he said, stoking the fire. And yes, my family's been hunting these woods for generations. We know how to live off the land. What do you hunt primarily? She asked. His smile revealed yellowed teeth. Whatever strays into our territory. The door banged open, making me jump. Two men entered, shaking rain from their coats, both tall and raw-boned like Samuel, but younger, with the same watery blue eyes. They carried burlap sacks that dripped dark liquid onto the wooden floor. Boys, Samuel said, we got guests. This is Eliza and James. They got turned around in our woods. The taller of the two men gave us a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I'm Ezra. This here's my brother Noah. You folks are lucky Pa found you. Easy to get lost out there, especially when the forest doesn't want you found. The way he phrased it sent chills down my spine. Got something special for dinner, Noah said, dropping his sack with a wet thud that made me wince. Found a buck caught in one of our traps. Samuel nodded approvingly. Well, let's not keep our guests waiting. Noah, show James where he can wash up. Ezra, help me with the meat. Eliza, you're welcome to rest by the fire. Noah gestured for me to follow him down a narrow hallway. He opened a door to a small bathroom with ancient fixtures. Towels there if you need it, he said. Water runs cold, just so you know. As he turned to leave, I noticed dark stains on the back of his flannel shirt. Too dark to be mud, too abundant to be from a normal day's work. Thanks, I managed to say. Once alone, I splashed water on my face and tried to calm my racing heart. Something was very wrong here. I needed to find Eliza and get us out, storm or no storm. The bathroom window was small, but might be big enough to squeeze through. I tried to open it, but it was painted shut. Looking around for something to pry it with, I opened the medicine cabinet and nearly screamed. Inside, neatly arranged, were driver's licenses and ID cards. Dozens of them, from people of various ages and states. Some dated back decades, others looked more recent. All belonged to people who'd probably come to hike Pine Ridge, just like us. With shaking hands, I took out my phone to document what I'd found, forgetting it was dead, then tried the GPS device instead. To my shock, it powered on, showing a strange message on the screen. Run. A knock at the door made me jump. You fall in, Noah called, his voice carrying a hint of suspicion. Sorry, just feeling a bit sick, I called back, hastily closing the cabinet. Must be the altitude. We're only at 4,000 feet, he said, sounding amused. Dinner's ready when you are. I listened to his footsteps retreating, then checked the window again. Too small and sealed tight. I had no choice but to return to the main room and hope for an opportunity to escape with Eliza. When I emerged, the scene in the main room had transformed. A large wooden table now dominated the space, set with mismatched plates and cutlery. Samuel, Ezra, and Noah were seated, with Eliza across from an empty chair presumably meant for me. On the table was a roast of some kind, steam rising from the browned meat. There he is, Samuel said with that yellow smile. Sit, meat's getting cold. I took my place beside Eliza, trying to catch her eye, but she seemed focused on the food. The men began to serve themselves generous portions of the roast. James isn't feeling well, Noah informed his family. "That right?" Samuel asked, fixing me with those watery eyes. "Well, nothing fixes a troubled stomach like good, fresh meat." Ezra placed a thick slice on my plate. Up close, the meat didn't look quite right. The texture was off, the color too dark for venison or beef. "What exactly are we eating?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Told you," Noah said. "Buck we caught in our trap." But the knowing look that passed between the brothers told me otherwise. "I found something interesting in the bathroom," I said suddenly, causing Eliza to look up sharply. "A collection of IDs. Hikers, mostly." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Samuel's smile remained fixed, but his eyes turned cold. "People lose things in the woods all the time," he said carefully. "We keep what we find in case the owners come looking." "And do they come looking?" I pressed. "Not often," Ezra said, taking a bite of the meat. "Most folks who lose their way out here stay lost." "James," Eliza said softly, a warning in her voice. "Don't be rude to our hosts." Something in her tone made me glance at her plate. She hadn't touched the meat. "Not hungry, miss?" Samuel asked, noticing too. "Actually," she said, "I think we should be going. The rain seems to have stopped." I listened. She was right. The hammering on the roof had ceased. Samuel's expression darkened. "Wouldn't advise traveling these woods at night," he said. "All manner of things come out after dark." "We have good flashlights," I said, standing up. "And we've imposed enough." Noah and Ezra exchanged glances but remained seated. Samuel sighed deeply. "Well, can't keep you if you're set on leaving. But at least take some food for the trail. Ezra, wrap up some meat for our guests." Ezra grudgingly cut several slices of the roast and wrapped them in waxed paper, handing the package to me. I took it without any intention of eating it. "I'll mark your map before you go," Samuel offered, "so you don't wander back our way by mistake." While he bent over my map, making exaggerated X marks over certain areas, I noticed Eliza slip something into her pocket, a small knife from the table. Our eyes met briefly, and I knew we were thinking the same thing. Get out. Fast. Samuel walked us to the door. "Stick to the main trail heading east," he advised. "You should hit a ranger station by noon tomorrow, and whatever you do, don't go off trail, especially not after dark." The sun was already low in the sky as we set off, following Samuel's directions. We walked in tense silence until the cabin was well out of sight. Then Eliza grabbed my arm, pulling me to a stop. "We need to run," she whispered. "Now. Not east, like he said. South, toward the river." "How do you know?" "I saw a real map while they were preparing dinner. They marked the territory they patrol. South is our best chance." Without waiting for my agreement, she veered off the trail, heading into the dense trees. I followed, half running to keep up with her determined pace. "Those IDs you found," she called back over her shoulder. "How many?" "Dozens," I panted, "going back years." "And that meat wasn't venison," she said grimly. "Did you see the bones in the fire? Too small for deer. Human finger bones burn a certain way." The realization of what we'd almost eaten made me gag. "We need to find Marcus. Get help." Eliza stopped so suddenly I nearly ran into her. "James," she said, turning to face me, "Samuel was telling the truth about one thing. There is no Ranger Marcus Reed." "But we met him," I protested. "He guided us." "I've been coming to Pine Ridge for 3 years photographing wildlife. I know every ranger in the area. There's no Marcus Reed." Before I could process this, a distant shout echoed through the trees. The Blackwoods had discovered our escape sooner than we'd hoped. "They'll track us," Eliza said. "We need to split up." "That's a terrible idea," I objected. "I'm faster than you," she said flatly. "I can lead them away while you head south. Find the river, follow it east. You'll hit civilization eventually." "I can't leave you." "I know these woods," she insisted. "I'll be fine. Meet me at the river bend with the big sycamore in 2 hours. If I'm not there by midnight, don't wait." Before I could argue further, She pressed the small knife she'd taken into my hand. "Just in case," she said. Then she kissed my cheek and took off running west, making far more noise than necessary, deliberately drawing attention. I stood frozen for a moment, then heard another shout, closer this time, followed by the baying of dogs. The Blackwoods were hunting us. I ran south as Eliza had instructed, trying to move quietly while maintaining speed. The forest grew darker by the minute, the trees seeming to close in around me. More than once I thought I heard footsteps matching mine, stopping when I stopped, continuing when I did. But I saw no one when I turned to look. Night fell completely, and I was forced to use my flashlight despite the risk of being spotted. The beam caught strange reflections among the trees, eyes watching me perhaps, or just dewdrops on leaves. The whispers returned too. Soft voices just at the edge of hearing, speaking words I almost but not quite understood. I stumbled on, using the compass on my watch to keep heading south. After what felt like hours of desperate flight, I heard the blessed sound of running water. The river. I'd made it. Following the bank eastward, I searched for the sycamore Eliza had mentioned. The moon emerged from behind the clouds, casting enough light to see by, and I switched off my flashlight to make myself less visible. That's when I saw her, a figure standing by a massive sycamore tree about 50 yards ahead. Relief washed over me. "Eliza!" I called in a loud whisper, hurrying toward her. She didn't respond or turn. As I got closer, I noticed she was standing unnaturally still, facing the river. When I was about 10 feet away, she finally turned. In the moonlight, I could see it was indeed Eliza, but something was terribly wrong. Her movements were stiff, mechanical. Her eyes, normally warm brown, now reflected the moonlight like an animal's, and her smile. It stretched too wide across her face, revealing too many teeth. "James," she said, her voice subtly wrong, like someone doing a poor imitation of Eliza. "You made it." I stopped, clutching the small knife in my pocket. "Where are the Blackwoods?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Gone," she said, still with that terrible smile. "Everything's fine now." "What happened to you?" She tilted her head at an impossible angle. "Nothing happened. I'm fine. Better than fine." She took a step toward me. "I met someone in the woods, James. Someone who's been here a very long time. They showed me things. Wonderful things." Another step closer. "The Blackwoods serve them, you know. Bring them offerings, fresh meat. But sometimes they need a body, too." My mouth went dry. "Eliza, this isn't you." Her smile widened further, the corners of her mouth literally stretching toward her ears. "Eliza is here," she said in that wrong voice. "She's just not alone anymore, and neither will you be." She lunged forward with inhuman speed. I scrambled backward, tripping over a root and landing hard on my back. Eliza, or the thing wearing Eliza, was on me in an instant, pinning me down with strength her frame shouldn't have possessed. "Don't fight," she whispered, her breath unnaturally cold against my face. "It only hurts until you surrender." Her fingers dug into my shoulders like claws, and I felt something trying to push into my mind. A presence, ancient and hungry, trying to hollow me out from the inside. In desperation, I brought up the knife, plunging it into her side. She hissed, a sound no human throat could make, and recoiled. Dark liquid, too thick and too dark to be blood, oozed from the wound. I scrambled to my feet and ran blindly into the forest, away from the river, away from the thing that had been Eliza. Behind me, I heard that inhuman hiss turn into a howl of rage that echoed through the trees. I ran until my lungs burned, until my legs threatened to give out. When I finally collapsed behind a fallen tree, gasping for breath, I realized I had no idea where I was. I'd left the river, my only sure path to civilization, and was now hopelessly lost in the wilderness that the Blackwoods called home. As I sat there trying to quiet my breathing, I heard a twig snap nearby. Freezing in place, I peered into the darkness, expecting to see Eliza's distorted form or one of the Blackwoods. Instead, Marcus Reed stepped into a shaft of moonlight, looking exactly as he had when we first met. His ranger uniform was immaculate, his expression concerned. "James," he called softly, "is that you?" Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by suspicion. Samuel had said there was no Ranger Reed. Eliza had confirmed it. "Stay back," I warned, brandishing the bloody knife. Marcus raised his hands placatingly. "It's okay, James. I know what happened. I've been tracking the Blackwoods for years." "Samuel said there's no Ranger Reed," I challenged. A sad smile crossed Marcus's face. Of course he'd say that. The Blackwoods don't want anyone knowing there's law enforcement in these woods. He took a careful step closer. "Where's Eliza?" The mention of her name brought fresh horror. Something got her. Something's inside her now." Marcus nodded grimly. "The Whisperer. That's what the Lakota called it. An ancient spirit that can wear human skin. The Blackwoods worship it, feed it." "How do you know all this?" His expression darkened. "Because I've seen it before. The Blackwoods lure hikers out here as offerings. Most, they just eat. But sometimes the Whisperer chooses one to possess." Another step closer. "I can help you, James. I know how to fight this thing. I have a cabin not far from here. We can regroup, arm ourselves properly." Something nagged at the back of my mind. If you're really a ranger, why don't you call for backup? Arrest the Blackwoods? Marcus sighed. "I've tried. No one believes me. And the Whisperer. It has ways of making evidence disappear, making people forget." He was close enough now that I could see his eyes in the moonlight. They reflected eerily, just like Eliza's had. I scrambled backward. "You're not Marcus." His face remained calm, but something shifted behind those reflective eyes. "Don't be ridiculous, James. You're in shock. The real Marcus, if he ever existed, is probably dead. The Blackwoods killed him and the Whisperer took his form." I was piecing it together as I spoke. That's how you guide hikers to them, isn't it? Gain their trust, lead them astray. Marcus's face contorted, the friendly facade cracking. When he spoke again, his voice had the same wrong quality Eliza's had, like something trying to remember how to sound human. "You could have made this easy," he said. "A quick possession. Now we'll have to do this the hard way." His jaw unhinged like a snake's, the mouth opening impossibly wide. From the blackness within, something began to emerge. A writhing darkness that seemed to absorb the moonlight. I ran again, crashing through underbrush, no longer caring about the noise. Behind me, I heard trees splintering as something large moved through the forest in pursuit. In my blind panic, I nearly ran headlong into a clearing and stopped just in time. Ahead was the Blackwood cabin, lights burning in its windows. I'd somehow circled back to where this nightmare had begun. Ducking behind a thick pine, I tried to think. I was exhausted, lost, being hunted by something inhuman that could wear familiar faces, and my only alternative was a family of cannibals. The situation couldn't get much worse. Then I heard Eliza scream. The sound came from inside the cabin, a scream of pure agony that cut off abruptly. Without thinking, I crept closer, moving from tree to tree until I reached a window. Peering inside, I saw Samuel and his sons gathered around a large wooden table. On it lay Eliza, bound and bleeding from dozens of small cuts. Samuel was chanting in a language I didn't recognize, while Ezra methodically sliced into Eliza's arm with a curved knife. But what made my blood freeze was what emerged from the cuts. Not blood, but the same dark, viscous substance I'd seen earlier. It writhed like it was alive, trying to maintain its hold inside Eliza's body, even as Samuel collected it in a clay bowl. "The vessel rejected it," Noah was saying. "We need to extract it all before it dies." "The other one is still out there," Ezra replied. "The Whisperer can take him instead." Samuel dipped his fingers in the dark substance, then drew symbols on Eliza's forehead. This one fought too hard. Some humans aren't suitable vessels. Their will is too strong. Eliza's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, they were clear and human again. Her gaze found the window where I hid, and I saw recognition there, followed by a silent plea. I knew what she was asking. The real Eliza was fighting her way back, forcing out the entity that had possessed her, but her body was failing from the trauma. The small knife in my hand suddenly felt very inadequate against 3 men and an ancient evil, but I couldn't leave her like that. I had to try. Taking a deep breath, I prepared to rush the door, when a hand clamped over my mouth from behind. I struggled wildly until a voice whispered in my ear, "Stop fighting if you want to live." It was a woman's voice, rough with age but strong. When I nodded, the hand released me. I turned to find myself face to face with an elderly woman, her weather-beaten face lined with determination. She wore practical outdoor clothing and carried a shotgun with obvious familiarity. "Another Blackwood," I whispered. She spat on the ground. "I'm Martha Creighton. The Blackwoods murdered my husband 30 years ago when he was forest ranger here. I've been hunting them ever since." "You need to help my friend," I pleaded, pointing to the window. Martha's expression softened with pity as she glanced inside. "That's not your friend anymore, son. Even if we could get the whisper out of her, she wouldn't survive. But it is her. She's fighting it." I saw her eyes. Martha studied me for a moment, then nodded. "I've never seen anyone force the whisper out before. But if she's trying..." She handed me a revolver. "You know how to use this?" I nodded, though I'd only fired a gun a few times at a range. "Good enough. We go in fast and quiet. You get your friend, I'll handle the Blackwoods. And if that thing inside her makes a move..." She tapped the shotgun. "You put her down. Understand? That thing can't be allowed to find another host." The cold calculation in her voice chilled me, but I nodded anyway. Martha pointed to the back of the cabin. "There's a cellar entrance. They won't expect that. On my signal." We crept around to the rear of the cabin, where wooden doors lay flat against the ground, leading to what I assumed was a root cellar. Martha eased one open with practiced stealth, revealing stone steps descending into darkness. "Stay close," she whispered, leading the way down. The cellar smelled of earth and something metallic. Blood, I realized with growing horror. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I saw hooks hanging from the ceiling beams. Implements that looked more suited to a slaughterhouse than a root cellar lined the walls. Martha moved with surprising agility for her age, finding a narrow staircase that led up to what must be the cabin's interior. At the top was a trap door. She paused, listening, then slowly pushed it open an inch. "Now," she whispered, throwing the trapdoor fully open and surging through with her shotgun raised. I followed, finding myself in a small pantry adjacent to the main room where I'd seen Eliza. The sounds of Samuel's chanting grew louder. Martha burst into the main room, shotgun leveled. "Step away from the girl, Blackwood." The scene froze. Samuel stood with the bowl of black liquid, Ezra with the knife poised over Eliza's chest, Noah reaching for a rifle propped against the wall. "Martha Creighton," Samuel said, his voice unperturbed. "Still holding that grudge, I see." 30 years isn't long enough to forget what you did to Paul," she replied, her shotgun unwavering. "Step away, or I paint your walls with what passes for your brains." Noah's hand inched toward the rifle. Martha swung the shotgun his way and fired without hesitation. The blast caught him in the shoulder, spinning him away from the weapon and into the wall with a sickening thud. I used the distraction to rush to Eliza's side, the revolver trained on Ezra. "Drop the knife," I commanded, surprised at how steady my voice sounded. Ezra's eyes flicked to his father, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. The knife clattered to the floor. "You're making a terrible mistake," Samuel said calmly. "The Whisperer has chosen. It must complete the transfer, or something far worse will happen." "Shut up," Martha snapped. "James, check your friend. Is she still in there?" I looked down at Eliza. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale where it wasn't covered in blood or that black substance. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing on me with difficulty. "James," she whispered, her voice weak but her own. "You came back." "I'm getting you out of here," I promised, using my free hand to start untying her bindings. "Can't," she whispered. "It's still inside. Not all gone." As if in response to her words, the black substance on her skin began to move, coalescing and slithering toward the wound in her side where I'd stabbed her earlier. "Kill it now!" Martha shouted, but I couldn't bring myself to shoot Eliza. Instead, I grabbed Ezra's knife from the floor and, without allowing myself to think about what I was doing, pressed it against the wound, forcing the black substance out as Eliza screamed in agony. Samuel lunged forward with surprising speed for his age, knocking Martha's shotgun aside as she fired her second barrel into the ceiling. Ezra dived for his brother's fallen rifle. The cabin erupted into chaos. Martha and Samuel grappled for the shotgun. Ezra raised the rifle toward me, and the black substance, driven from Eliza's wound, reared up like a cobra seeking a new host. I fired the revolver at Ezra, my shot going wide but causing him to duck for cover. The black substance surged toward Samuel, who opened his arms as if welcoming an old friend. "Father," it cried in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The entity flowed into Samuel through his eyes, nose, and mouth. His body convulsed, then straightened with new purpose. When he looked at us again, his watery blue eyes had turned completely black. "Samuel is gone," the thing wearing his body announced. "I am the Whisperer, and you have trespassed long enough." He flung Martha across the room with inhuman strength. She crashed into the far wall and slumped to the floor, dazed but still conscious. I fired the revolver at the thing that had been Samuel, hitting it squarely in the chest. It looked down at the wound with mild curiosity as black ichor oozed out instead of blood. "Your weapons cannot harm me," it said, advancing slowly. "I have worn 1,000 skins over 10,000 years. I have been worshipped as a god and feared as a demon. And now, James Whitaker, I will wear you." I backed away, firing the revolver again and again until it clicked empty. The Whisperer continued its steady approach, smiling with too many teeth in Samuel's stretched mouth. Eliza's voice, weak but determined, came from behind me. "Fire!" she gasped. "It fears fire." I glanced around desperately, spotting the fireplace where embers still glowed. A half-burnt log protruded from the ashes. I lunged for it, feeling the heat sear my hand as I grasped it and thrust it toward the advancing entity. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The Whisperer shrieked, a sound that seemed to bypass my ears and vibrate directly in my brain, and recoiled from the burning wood. The flesh around Samuel's eyes blistered and blackened, not from the heat, but as if the mere proximity to fire was anathema to the creature. "Martha!" I shouted. "Fire! Use fire!" The old woman pulled herself to her feet, understanding immediately. She grabbed a lantern from a nearby table and hurled it at the possessed Samuel. Glass shattered, kerosene sprayed, and flames erupted across his chest and face. The Whisperer's scream intensified, a psychic howl of rage and pain that made my vision blur. Samuel's body thrashed and convulsed as the flames spread, the black ichor that had replaced his blood seeming to fuel the fire rather than be consumed by it. Ezra emerged from his hiding place, horror on his face as he watched his father burn. "Pa!" he cried, rushing forward only to be driven back by the intense heat. I turned to Eliza, who was struggling to sit up despite her injuries. "We need to get out of here now." The fire was spreading to the wooden walls and floor of the cabin with unnatural speed. I helped Eliza to her feet, supporting her weight as she swayed unsteadily. Martha grabbed her shotgun from the floor and covered our retreat, keeping a wary eye on Ezra. "Move!" she barked. "This whole place is going up." We stumbled toward the door, the heat at our backs growing more intense by the second. Behind us, the Whisperer's screams had taken on a new quality, Not just pain and rage now, but fear. "It's trapped," Martha explained as we burst out into the cool night air. "Fire is the one thing it can't escape. Burns away its essence so it can't transfer to a new host." We staggered to a safe distance and turned to watch the cabin, now fully engulfed in flames that burned with an eerie bluish tinge in places. The screaming continued for several long minutes, becoming less human and more alien as the Whisperer's disguise burned away. Then, abruptly, it stopped. In the sudden silence, I became aware of Eliza's labored breathing as she leaned heavily against me. Her wounds were still bleeding, though the strange black substance was gone. "She needs medical attention," I told Martha urgently. The old woman nodded. "My place isn't far. I've got supplies." "What about Ezra?" I asked, scanning the area around the burning cabin. "If he was smart, he ran," Martha said grimly. "If not—" She gestured to the inferno, which had begun to collapse in on itself. We made our way through the dark forest, Martha leading with surprising confidence despite the lack of clear trails. After about 20 minutes of difficult hiking, with me practically carrying Eliza at points, we reached a small, well-maintained cabin set into a hillside. Inside was unexpectedly modern. Solar panels provided electricity for lights and a small refrigerator, and a ham radio sat on a desk in the corner. Martha directed me to lay Eliza on a narrow bed while she gathered first aid supplies. "You've been out here a long time," I observed as she expertly cleaned and bandaged Eliza's wounds. 30 years, she confirmed. "After Paul disappeared, the authorities gave up looking. Said he probably got lost, fell into a ravine. I knew better. Started tracking the Blackwoods, learning their patterns. Found evidence, clothes, personal effects from dozens of missing hikers. But whenever I brought authorities out here, things would change. Evidence would vanish. Trails would lead nowhere." "The Whisperer," I murmured. She nodded. "It protects its servants. Or they serve it. Hard to say which. Is it dead?" Eliza asked weakly from the bed. Martha's expression hardened. "No. Weakened, maybe. Forced back to whatever hell it came from for a while. But it'll find a way back eventually. Always does." "How do you know so much about it?" I asked. "Lakota elders," she replied. "Found an old man who remembered the stories. The Whisperer wasn't always here. It came with European settlers, though it's much older than them. Latched onto the Blackwood family generations ago, promising power in exchange for worship and sacrifice." I shuddered, remembering the IDs in the bathroom cabinet, the venison that wasn't venison at all. "Will she be okay?" I asked, looking at Eliza's pale face. "Hard to say. Never seen anyone survive being partially possessed before. The extraction process alone would kill most people." Martha checked Eliza's pulse. "She's strong, though. Good chance." She was right. By morning, Eliza's fever had broken, and her color had improved dramatically. Whatever the Whisperer had done to her seemed to be fading, though the physical wounds would take longer to heal. Martha used her ham radio to call for help, giving coordinates to a Forest Service contact she trusted. By midday, a rescue helicopter was circling the area. As we waited in a clearing for it to land, Martha pressed something into my hand, her revolver, reloaded. "Take this," she said, "just in case." "In case of what?" Her eyes, sharp with decades of survival in these woods, met mine. "In case it followed you out. The Whisperer has been known to leave fragments of itself behind. Like seeds." A chill ran through me as I remembered the whispering voices I'd heard in the forest. The feeling of something trying to push into my mind when the possessed Eliza had attacked me. How would I know? I asked, my mouth dry. My dreams, at first. Voices suggesting things. Moments of lost time. If that happens... She nodded at the gun. "You know what to do." The helicopter landed, kicking up dust and pine needles. Paramedics rushed toward us with a stretcher for Eliza. Martha melted back into the trees before the rescue team could ask too many questions. leaving me to create a sanitized version of events for the authorities. I told them we'd gotten lost, been attacked by wild animals, found shelter in an abandoned cabin that caught fire. They seemed skeptical, but had no better explanation for our injuries or the smoldering ruins of the Blackwood cabin they'd spotted from the air. Eliza was airlifted to a hospital in Rapid City, where she spent 2 weeks recovering. I stayed nearby, giving the same sanitized story to police and park rangers who investigated the incident. No trace of the Blackwoods was ever found in the ashes of the cabin. No bones, no teeth, nothing to suggest human remains. The official report concluded that we'd been the victims of an unfortunate series of accidents and delusions brought on by dehydration and exposure. Eliza remembered everything, though we spoke of it only when we were alone. The Whisperer had been inside her mind, she told me. It had shown her visions of ancient cities where it had been worshipped, of the countless hosts it had worn throughout history. It had nearly consumed her entirely before I'd stabbed her with the knife, creating a way for it to be drawn out. "It's still out there," she said the night before she was discharged from the hospital. "I can feel it sometimes like an echo. It knows us now, James. Knows our names, our faces, our minds." I showed her the revolver Martha had given me, explained its purpose. Eliza nodded without surprise or fear. "We should stay together," she suggested. "Easier to watch for signs that way." So we did. We both quit our jobs, moved to a small town in Michigan, as far from Nebraska as we could reasonably go. We took precautions: salt across thresholds, iron above doors, fire extinguishers in every room. Superstitious, perhaps, but comforting. For 6 months, we lived in relative peace. Eliza's physical wounds healed completely, though she was plagued by nightmares. I had them too. Dreams of running through endless forests while something pursued me, of Samuel Blackwood's face stretching to accommodate too many teeth, of Eliza with those reflective animal eyes. Then, last week, I woke at 3 a.m. to find Eliza's side of the bed empty. I found her in the kitchen, staring out the window into the darkness, completely motionless. "Eliza," I called softly, keeping my distance. When she turned, her eyes were normal, her smile her own. "Sorry, couldn't sleep," she said. "Just needed some water." But as she brushed past me on her way back to bed, I caught a whiff of something. A faint, musty odor like wet earth and rotting leaves. The smell of the Pine Ridge forest. The smell of the Blackwood cabin. I haven't slept properly since. Last night I found her standing over me in the darkness, just watching me breathe. When I startled awake, she apologized, said she was checking if I was having a nightmare. Martha's revolver is in my bedside drawer. I check it compulsively, make sure it's loaded, accessible. I watch Eliza for signs, head tilts that are a little too mechanical, smiles that last a little too long, blinks that are too few and far between. Is it paranoia or vigilance? I don't know anymore. But I know what I saw in those woods. I know what the Whisperer can do, how it can hide inside someone you trust, someone you love. Eliza is out grocery shopping now. She's been gone 2 hours for what should have been a 20-minute errand. My phone shows her location at the supermarket. Hasn't moved. The revolver sits heavy in my pocket as I write this. If you're reading this, one of 2 things has happened. Either I've given in to paranoia and done something unforgivable to an innocent woman who survived a trauma, or I wasn't paranoid enough, wasn't quick enough to recognize the signs. The front door just opened. I hear footsteps in the hallway, a bit too measured, a bit too deliberate. And underneath the normal household smells, I detect it again. Wet earth, rotting leaves, the forest. I have to go now. She's calling my name, and her voice is almost right. Almost. My name is Daniel Wheeler, 34. This happened in October 2023. The Pine Ridge region of Nebraska isn't known for mountains, not like the Rockies or the Appalachians. but its rugged buttes and ridges rise dramatically from the surrounding plains. Locals call it Nebraska's mountains, a modest description that belies the area's wild beauty and isolation. For someone like me who had spent the last decade trapped in the corporate grind of Chicago, the Pine Ridge National Forest represented freedom, solitude, and a chance to reset my life after the divorce. I'd been planning this 2-week solo expedition for months, a chance to test my limits and reconnect with myself. Sarah had called me impulsive and unstable when I quit my job and cashed out my 401k, but she hadn't understood me for years before she left. This trek would prove I could stand on my own, make my own choices. The fact that cell reception was virtually non-existent in the area's remote canyons only added to the appeal. My trek started at the Soldier Creek Wilderness area, an isolated corner of the forest where the ponderosa pines grow thick and most tourists never venture. I'd plotted a loop that would take me through some of the most remote parts of the region: Crow Butte, Coffee Mill Butte, and eventually to the abandoned logging settlement of Bessemer before circling back. 14 days, 70 miles of rough terrain, and absolute solitude. The first 3 days were everything I'd hoped for. The autumn air was crisp, scented with pine and sage. The forest canopy blazed with gold and crimson. At night, the stars spread like diamond dust across the sky, unobscured by light pollution. I slept better than I had in years, lulled by the soft whisper of wind through the pines. On the 4th day, I hiked up a steep ridge with stunning views of the White River Valley below. I made camp early, wanting to enjoy the sunset. That's when I first noticed the strange tracks. They resembled deer prints, but something was off about them. The impressions were deeper than they should have been, and the spacing suggested an unnatural gait. I followed them for about 20 yards before they simply vanished at the base of a large rock formation. Probably just a deer with an injury, I told myself, though the explanation felt hollow. That night I woke to a sound that wasn't quite a howl and wasn't quite a scream. Something that lingered in the space between animal and human. The fire had burned down to embers, and the moonlight cast long shadows through the trees. I told myself it was just a mountain lion or perhaps a fox, but I kept my hunting knife close as I drifted back to sleep. The next morning dawned misty and cool. I packed up quickly, eager to reach Beaver Creek by nightfall. The map showed an old Forest Service cabin there, not much more than a shelter, but it would be good to have walls around me for a night. The day's hike took me through increasingly dense forest. Though it was mid-morning, the canopy overhead was so thick that it felt like dusk. The trail had grown faint, forcing me to check my compass and map frequently. Around noon, I paused at a small stream to refill my water bottles. That's when I noticed the carvings on a nearby tree, crude symbols that looked like no language I recognized. They appeared fresh, the exposed wood still pale against the bark. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding thin in the dense forest. No response. I hurried away from the stream, an uneasy feeling settling in my stomach. I was deep in the wilderness now, at least 20 miles from the nearest paved road. The solitude that had felt so refreshing just days ago suddenly seemed oppressive. By mid-afternoon, I knew something was wrong. According to my map, I should have reached a ridge overlooking Beaver Creek hours ago, but the forest stretched endlessly in all directions. I checked my compass again, wondering if I'd made a wrong turn, but it pointed steadily north as it had all day. Or did it? I frowned, tapping the compass face. The needle swung wildly for a moment before settling again, but now it pointed west. I shook the compass, but the needle remained fixed. "What the hell?" I muttered, pulling out my backup compass from my pack. It showed the same direction. I pulled out my GPS unit, an expensive model I'd bought specifically for this trip. The screen showed no signal. Not low signal, but no signal at all, as if the satellites had simply disappeared from the sky. For the first time since starting my journey, I felt a flicker of panic. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to think rationally. I was an experienced hiker. I had supplies, water, and shelter. I would be fine. I decided to make camp early and try to get my bearings in the morning. I found a small clearing and set up my tent with mechanical efficiency, trying to ignore the growing silence around me. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. The forest was unnaturally still. As I gathered wood for a fire, I found another carved tree, then another. The symbols were different but carried the same unsettling quality. I tried to dismiss them as trail markers left by other hikers, but they didn't match any blazes I'd ever seen. Night fell quickly. I built my fire larger than necessary, taking comfort in its warm glow. I heated a freeze-dried meal but found I had little appetite. The silence of the forest pressed against me like a physical weight. Just as I was about to retreat to my tent, I heard it, the same not quite human cry from the night before, but closer now, much closer. I reached for my knife, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Who's there?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. No answer but the soft crackle of my fire. Then I saw it, a shadow moving between the trees, just at the edge of the firelight. Not a deer or any animal I recognized. It moved with a jerking, unnatural gait, as if each step caused it pain. "I see you," I shouted, brandishing my knife. "I'm armed." The shadow paused, then stepped forward into the light. My breath caught in my throat. It had the general shape of a man, but that's where the resemblance ended. Its skin was a patchwork of leather and bark, its limbs too long and jointed in the wrong places. Where its face should have been was a crude approximation, knots for eyes, a jagged crack for a mouth. It smelled of rotting leaves and stagnant water. "What do you want?" I whispered, backing toward my tent. The thing tilted its head, the movement too fluid, too far. Its mouth crack widened into what might have been a smile. "Daniel Wheeler," it said in a voice like dry leaves scraping across stone. "We've been waiting for you." I ran. I abandoned my camp, my supplies, everything except the knife in my hand and the headlamp on my forehead. I crashed through the underbrush, branches clawing at my face and arms. Behind me, I heard movement. Not the sound of pursuit, but something spreading out, surrounding me. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs threatened to collapse. When I finally stopped, gasping for breath, I realized I had no idea where I was. The trees around me were unfamiliar, twisted into shapes that seemed to defy nature. My headlamp cast bizarre shadows that appeared to move even when I stood still. I spent that night huddled at the base of a large tree, knife clutched in my trembling hand, jumping at every sound. When dawn finally broke, it brought little relief. The sky between the branches was an unnatural shade of gray, and the sun seemed dimmer than it should have been. I needed to find my way back to civilization. Without my compass or GPS, I had to rely on basic wilderness skills. Moss grows predominantly on the north side of trees in the northern hemisphere, but here, the moss grew in spiraling patterns that encircled the trunks completely. Streams generally flow downhill toward larger bodies of water, but the creek I found flowed in a perfect circle, the water moving without any discernible source or destination. Nothing made sense. It was as if the natural laws I had always taken for granted no longer applied. As I stumbled through this twisted landscape, I began to notice signs of human presence. Abandoned campsites similar to my own, backpacks hanging from tree branches, a single boot placed neatly in the middle of a clearing. Each discovery filled me with dread rather than hope. On what I estimated was my 7th day in the wilderness, though time had become difficult to track, I found a cabin. Not the Forest Service shelter I had been seeking originally, but a crude structure of rough-hewn logs that looked both ancient and somehow newly built. Smoke rose from a stone chimney. Despite every instinct screaming at me to run, my desperation for shelter and information won out. I approached cautiously, knife ready. "Hello?" I called from a safe distance. "Is anyone there?" The door creaked open, revealing an old man with a deeply lined face and eyes the color of tarnished pennies. He wore faded flannel and canvas pants that had been patched repeatedly. A gray beard reached nearly to his waist. "Thought I heard someone stumbling around out here," he said, his voice surprisingly strong for his apparent age. "You look half dead, boy. Come in before they find you." "They?" I asked, not moving. The old man glanced nervously at the surrounding trees. "The forest folk. Wendigo, some call 'em. They're hungry this time of year." Against my better judgment, I followed him inside. The cabin consisted of a single room containing a wood stove, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, and shelves crowded with preserved food and odd trinkets. Bundles of dried herbs hung from the ceiling, filling the air with a bitter, medicinal smell. "Name's Harrison," the old man said, gesturing for me to sit. "Been living out here going on 30 years. "Daniel," I replied, sinking gratefully into a chair. "Daniel Wheeler. I was hiking the Soldier Creek Trail when I got lost." Harrison nodded as if this was the most natural thing in the world. "They've been drawing more folks in lately. Hunting's been poor these past seasons." He placed a chipped mug of something hot in front of me. "Drink. It'll help." The liquid tasted of pine and something metallic, but it chased away the chill that had settled in my bones. As I drank, Harrison explained, or tried to explain, what was happening. According to him, the Pine Ridge Forest contained places where the boundary between our world and somewhere else had worn thin. These thresholds shifted with the seasons and phases of the moon, but they had been growing more numerous in recent years. People who ventured too close often found themselves lost in a place that resembled our world, but operated by different rules, and they weren't alone there. The forest folk, or skinwalkers as Harrison sometimes called them, had once been human, or something close to it. Now they served as shepherds, collecting lost travelers for some purpose Harrison either didn't know or wouldn't say. "They can take your shape," Harrison warned, eyes darting to the windows as darkness fell. "They study you, learn to mimic you. That's why they don't always hunt right away. They want to understand." "How do you survive out here?" I asked. Harrison gestured to the herbs hanging from the ceiling. "Protection. Knowledge passed down. And I give them what they need sometimes, so they leave me be." I didn't ask what he meant by that last part. I didn't want to know. Harrison offered to let me stay the night, an invitation I gratefully accepted. Before we slept, he gave me a small pouch containing dried herbs and what looked like small bones. "Keep this with you," he instructed. "And whatever you do, don't look any of them directly in the eyes. That's how they get in." I slept fitfully, waking often to the sound of scratching at the walls and roof. Each time, Harrison was already awake, muttering what sounded like prayers or incantations under his breath. In the pale light of morning, the old man's warnings seemed almost absurd. The forest outside the cabin windows looked normal, beautiful even. Birds sang. Sunlight dappled the leaf-strewn ground. It was easy to believe I had simply gotten lost and panicked, that the thing I'd seen at my campfire had been a hallucination brought on by stress and isolation. Harrison seemed diminished in the daylight, just a frail old hermit with possible dementia. Still, when he offered to show me a trail that would lead back to Soldier Creek, I didn't hesitate to accept. We set out after a breakfast of hard bread and dried meat. Harrison moved with surprising agility through the forest, following paths I couldn't discern. As we walked, he pointed out various plants and fungi, identifying which were edible and which were favored by them. I noticed he never used the words poisonous or toxic. Around midday, we reached what Harrison claimed was Coffee Mill Butte, though it looked nothing like the landmark I'd studied on my maps. At its base was a spring feeding into a small, crystal-clear pool. "Drink," Harrison said. "Good water." I knelt beside the pool, cupping my hands to bring the cool water to my lips. As I bent over the surface, I caught my reflection, except it wasn't quite right. My face looked gaunt, my eyes sunken, and behind me stood a figure that wasn't Harrison. I whirled around, but only the old man stood there, watching me with an unreadable expression. "Did you see?" I began. "Best keep moving," Harrison cut me off. "Still a ways to go." As we continued our journey, I began to notice subtle changes in Harrison's behavior. His stride became more fluid, his movements less those of an elderly man. He stopped identifying plants. Twice I caught him staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. By late afternoon, we reached a meadow surrounded by towering pines. At its center stood a circle of stones that reminded me of miniature Stonehenge. "Almost there," Harrison said, his voice different somehow, resonant in a way that made my skin crawl. "Just through those trees." I hesitated, clutching the pouch he had given me the night before. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. "Actually," I said, backing away slightly, "I think I recognize where we are. I can make it from here." Harrison turned to face me fully, and I gasped. His eyes, which I'd thought were brown, now glowed with an amber light. His smile stretched too wide for his face. "But Daniel," he said, his voice now a multi-toned chorus, "we've come all this way together. Don't you want to meet the others? They're so eager to know you, to become you." I ran. Again. This time with the creature that wasn't Harrison in pursuit. I crashed through the forest, the pouch clutched in my hand like a talisman. Behind me, I heard a sound like tearing fabric, followed by that same not-quite-human cry I'd heard nights before. I don't know how long I ran or in what direction. Trees blurred past me, branches slashing at my face and arms. At some point, I tripped over an exposed root and tumbled down a steep embankment, landing hard on what felt like a dirt road. Dazed, I looked up to see headlights approaching. A Forest Service truck. I scrambled to my feet, waving my arms frantically. The truck skidded to a stop and a uniformed ranger leaped out, hand on her sidearm. "Sir, are you all right?" she called, keeping her distance. Words tumbled out of me. A confused jumble about getting lost, about creatures in the woods, about Harrison. The ranger, whose name badge read Martinez, listened with growing concern, then guided me to her truck. "You're lucky I was patrolling this sector," she said as I settled into the passenger seat. "We've had 3 hikers go missing in this area this month alone." The ride back to the ranger station passed in a blur. I was given water, food, medical attention for my numerous cuts and scrapes. Ranger Martinez took my statement, her expression carefully neutral as I described my experiences. When I finished, she made a single call, speaking in low tones I couldn't quite catch. An hour later, a man in plain clothes arrived. He introduced himself as Agent Dawson with the Nebraska State Police, Special Investigations Unit. "Mr. Wheeler," he said, taking a seat across from me, "we've been tracking a series of disappearances in the Pine Ridge area for over a decade. Most are written off as hikers getting lost or animal attacks. But the pattern suggests something else." He showed me photographs, missing persons from across the years, all lost in the same general region. And then, most disturbing of all, a faded photograph from 1986 of a Forest Service team standing in front of a cabin. Among them was a man who looked exactly like Harrison. "Thomas Harrison," Agent Dawson explained, "Senior Forest Ranger. Disappeared during a routine patrol in 1987. His body was never found." I stayed at a motel in Chadron that night, jumpy at every sound. Agent Dawson arranged for a police escort to take me back to my car the next day. The official report would list me as a lost hiker, rescued before succumbing to the elements and confusion. No mention of creatures that weren't quite human, or an old man who couldn't possibly still be alive, or a landscape that defied natural law. But before I left, Dawson took me aside. "We can't put this in official reports," he said quietly. "But you're not the first to tell this kind of story. Indigenous people have warned about skinwalkers in these forests for generations. The modern world doesn't have a framework for understanding what you experienced, but that doesn't make it any less real." He pressed a business card into my hand. If you remember anything else, or if you ever notice anything unusual about yourself after this experience, call me immediately. It's been a year since my ordeal in the Pine Ridge Forest. I've tried to put it behind me, to return to something resembling a normal life. I found a new job, a new apartment. I even started dating again. But sometimes I catch my reflection moving a fraction of a second too slowly. Sometimes I wake with the taste of pine and metal in my mouth, and sometimes, when I'm alone, I find myself tilting my head at angles that shouldn't be possible, staring at the people around me with a hunger that doesn't feel entirely my own. I've started carving symbols into the trees in the park near my apartment. I don't know what they mean or why I feel compelled to create them. All I know is that they feel right somehow. Familiar. Agent Dawson's card sits on my nightstand. Some nights I reach for my phone, ready to call the number, but then I stop, wondering, would the real Daniel Wheeler make that call? Or would he encourage others to visit the beautiful Pine Ridge Forest, to hike those remote trails alone? After all, the forest folk are always hungry, and sometimes I think I might be too.